Hey, this is Barry from Better Be Sharp. Today we're sitting in with Mike Martin, guitarist for Agent Cooper, formerly of bands Fozzy, Stuck Mojo, and the Duke Project. Hey, Mike, how's it going?
Hey Barry, I'm doing great, man. How are you doing?
I'm doing just fine. So right now we're gonna talk to Mike about the fact that despite him being in a bunch of bands, he's done a lot of projects, a lot of bands. Um, we were talking about where he started, and so, Mike, if you'd like to tell us how you got into music, what made you want to pick up the guitar, and we'll just go from there.
Yeah, sure. My mom is a musician, and she's a classical singer, a choral director, opera singer, music educator, and all that stuff. So, we growing up in the house, music was just something that we did. Of course, when you're that little, you don't know any different. So it's kind of like if you had a parent who was into sports or whatever, you would play sports. But this is what we did in my house. So when I was 4 or 5 years old, my mom started me on Suzuki violin, which is a method for teaching very small children how to play the violin. It starts out basically by ear, and then you gradually move into how to read music and all that stuff. It basically teaches music as a language, an auditory language to children. It's really cool. It's really interesting. I have a younger brother who went through the same program as well. So kind of started there, did that for a while, and then my first trappings with understanding exactly how things work in the music world, I was taking these lessons with a young lady at the time who had a symphony gig, and I believe she fell in love with some other musician and ran away. And she was the only lady in town that taught Suzuki violin at the time, so that ended my violin career. Shortly after that, I started studying piano and always sang in choir, whether it was children's choir or whatever at church, because that's kind of what you do when mom is at church all weekend long doing every mass. You're either sitting there bored out of your mind or you participate. So I participated and sang just about every service that I could. I probably have a reserve of church in in my life because I spent so many services when I was younger at the church. But anyway, I guess I was about 8 or 9 when I started piano. I was kind of a feature of my older brother had started. Mom thought I was a little young still, but I was coming home from public school and music class there. I had a great music teacher in public school. His name was Duke Jones, and he was a graduate of the Berklee College of Music. And I loved that guy. He was just such a fun guy to be around, and he was just really engaging in everything music. He was a singer, he was a pianist, he was a saxophonist, just really all around talented guy. And I would come home and I would sit at the piano and I would pick out things by ear that I had learned or watched him play in class. And Mom just decided that, well, before I started teaching myself bad habits by ear, it was probably a good idea to get me lessons. So I started taking piano for a while, and I tended to like to do things by ear, so that wasn't really going well for me in my relationship with my piano teacher, because, of course, my piano teacher wanted me to read the stuff, and I would kind of half read, and then I would kind of improvise the rest, because it sounded all right, and then she would go, no, and make me start over, and do the same thing, except I would improvise it differently, and she'd say, no, start over. And then she'd get frustrated, and she would play the example for me as if I didn't know what I was doing. And then I would just play back for her what she'd play for me. So it was very frustrating back and forth kind of thing that I was always kind of being disciplined. And she knew that I would play pretty much anything that she would play for me. So I didn't last too long with piano lessons either. Sometime after that, I don't remember where exactly. Like, there was not really a thing of guitars around me at home. Like, my mom, very classical music. Jazz was not really a thing around my house. Probably my first introductions to jazz and stuff were hearing bands like The Police on the radio. It was as close to jazz as I really remember hearing stuff, or Led Zeppelin, or, the Beatles would use some jazz harmony or something like that. But I didn't quite know what it was. I just thought it was rock music, and I was attracted to some of that stuff. But it's somewhere around, I guess, 4th grade, 5th grade, I heard Van Halen, and I was like, oh my God, what is this? I guess that was right around when Jump and Panama, and I guess the 1984 record came out, I was just enamored with that whole guitar thing. And that was probably the start of my fascination with guitar music, but I didn't get one until a couple of years after that. I guess that's the short version to how I got to the guitar anyway.
Now, your first guitar, did you get that for yourself, or was that something that, like, your parents kind of wanted you to do the classical thing, but it wasn't working out? They're like, okay, so let's give this guy a guitar. He seems to be focused on that now, so maybe he can go somewhere with that.
It's actually kind of funny. It's a little more insidious than that. My parents, like a lot of young couples, divorced, and it was not a happy divorce. I think one of the best things my parents could have done for us kids get away from each other. Because they were not happy. And it was in that whole visiting dad on the weekends and alternating holidays and all of that stuff. When I decided I wanted a guitar, I decided I wanted an electric guitar. And my mother was going to have none of that because she was a classical musician and her son was not going to be a rock musician. That was that. And of course, my father, in all of his wisdom, thought that this was a great opportunity to, one, be his son's hero by getting him an electric guitar for Christmas, and two, send him home to his mother with it.
Oh.
So that's kind of how that started.
That is quite insidious. So, where did you really, like, did you just start getting in bands, or were you practicing by yourself? And then I know that that after you joined Fozzy, you were kind of described as that kind of like basement guitarist that was like a well-kept secret from everybody in the music world, by Rich Ward of Fozzy. But did you go seeking like other musicians to play guitar with and join a band early on, or was it just kind of your own self-experimenting with that?
It was a bit of everything. In New England, where I grew up, at least in that part of New Hampshire, there were a few guys that were older than me that played guitar that were my older brother's age, and my older brother played guitar as well. So, like, I kind of started teaching myself, and then, because I still had this ability to play by ear, and at this point I knew how to read music, so my dad just got me some music books, and so did my mom. So I just started transcribing records. So anyway, like, for me, like, as soon as I could, like, there weren't a lot of musicians around me my age, so I kind of was left to my own devices. By the time I got into high school, I think it was my sophomore year, I had gotten in a band. I started a band with some guys that were already out of school. Like, they were already 18, 19, 20, 21 years old, and that was my job. I played in a band, and we played bars and frat parties and dances and stuff like that. And that was really my first sort of thing. And when I got out of high school, I had always kind of imagined I was just going to go straight into college, and through a bunch of other circumstances decided to wait on that, partly because I had met a really good teacher in Myrtle Beach by the name of Tom Yoder, who was just a super talented guitar wizard, like really opened up everything in my playing to guys like Jason Becker and Marty Friedman, like just really exposed me to some really hip stuff that was going on with the electric guitar in the late 80s, early 90s, before grunge had kind of taken over. And like, this was kind of becoming my expectation. If you're going to be a guitar ninja or a Teenage Mutant Ninja guitar player, you needed to know how to do all of these two-handed things and all the sweet picking stuff and this economy of picking, and you needed to know all of your theory. You needed to be able to improvise. You needed to be able to shred on classical themes as well. And like he just kind of just opened it all up for me. So by the time I got through studying with him for about a year and a half, and I didn't quite feel like I wanted to go to Berkeley, because that wasn't really the thing. I'd gotten away from New England. I was living in South Carolina at that point. I felt like it was just about time to just get in a band and just go. So me and some of those same guys that I was in that band in New England with, some of those guys had already moved to Atlanta. So when I got out of school, I just made a beeline for Atlanta, and we started a band here and just immediately got to work. And that's where I met Rich Ward and Bones and Frank Bonsaret and everybody, whether they were in Salem Ash, which is now Agent Cooper, or Stuck Mojo at the time, a very young Stuck Mojo. I mean, we were all very young at the time. That was kind of like walking into Atlanta. That's everything that was going on. My trouble from there I had gigged a lot. I had always been gigging. I mean, since I was pretty young, like that first band, I was 15 when I started traveling around New England playing, and played all over the Southeast before I got out of high school. The thing that really got me was the whole grunge scene. I didn't know how to turn that corner because I was really designed to be a different kind of vegetable. And all of a sudden it wasn't cool to play guitar like that. Like if you didn't play like Kurt Cobain, or like you could maybe play like Alice in Chains, which I was into, and I was into Soundgarden. Like it was a really hard learning experience for me because there were bands that I liked that kind of came out of that alternative grunge scene. Like I liked Dinosaur Jr. I liked Nirvana. You know,
Right.
there was all kinds of stuff that I liked. What I didn't understand is the way that the music industry just said, all right, we're done with all of this stuff. We're just going to go this way. And how much people just followed suit with that. And like literally, I would be out at clubs in Atlanta and you could see a band with amazing guitar players. And then overnight, they were all wearing flannel and looking down at their shoes and depressed about the world, and they hated their parents. And it's like, what happened? It was a really bizarre experience. So after that, like I probably suffered with that for maybe a year and a half after getting out of high school, and then decided, well, I can't force the world to do something that I wanted to do. So while I'm figuring out what I want to do, because clearly things have changed, and you know I have all the wisdom of an 18-year-old now, maybe I might want to consider going to college. I mean, that was kind of always the plan. So let's get in a good music program and just figure out what the entire scope of music is really like, and see what I might be able to find in terms of a place in the world. So by the time, flash forward through all of that stuff to where I'm doing stuff with Rich and Fozzy and the Duke and all that, I had not been really in the quote-unquote rock scene. Like, I kind of gave up on it. Like, right then in 1994, I was just like, this is not going to happen. Like, I need to go another way. So I got really interested in jazz and actually got my degree in symphonic classical composition. So I figured you need to have a foundation. Like I needed to be able to write for any instrument, any orchestration that I wanted to, spend as much time playing jazz guitar as I could, kept up my classical guitar studies as well. Just wanted to be as well-rounded as I possibly could be. And it seemed like in the jazz world, you could play guitar. And believe me, jazzers will frown on you if you get over egregious with your guitar solos in jazz music, because it's not all about just, you know, playing for the sake of playing for yourself. So there was a lot to learn about being a tasty musician in an ensemble through that process, which I really enjoyed, because that was the one big split between rock players and better jazz musicians, because there are certainly wanker jazz musicians as well. That the sensitivity to composition over just displaying your chops all the time. And in rock, it shouldn't be rocket science. You should just put your stuff out there and let everybody see it and just be completely over the top. And I really liked that about the Fozzy gig for a while, because like there was really this element of you could be pretty cool throwback metal kind of groove stuff, but then, you know, in a moment of a guitar solo, you could just melt people's faces with just an over-the-top use of technique. And it really worked with that fan base, partly because of maybe the wrestling connection, where there's this whole, the holy shit thing. When a wrestler would do something so over the top, so dangerous, so ridiculous, a wrestler would get the holy shit chant. And I would get those chants after doing these solos at Fozzy shows, because they were kind of ridiculous, kind of over the top. I mean, they were just unapologetic. I wasn't worried about being tasteful. I was just worried about doing something over the top. So it was a lot of fun to get to put that stuff on display. But the whole basement guitar player thing, I had played a lot at that point. Like I did some time in some country bands, because you can make a lot of money in country. Like, and I played with just a local play around Georgia country band, and we were a 7-piece group, and I made more money in that band than probably just about any other group I've ever been in. That band just made money. And country is not my forte at all. Like, I was the lead guitar player in that band, and I have some chicken picking chops, but it's not my native language at all. So I spent some time doing that. Spent a lot of time playing in the blues scene. I actually got pretty well known around the Southeast as a blues guitar player. And I'm in a very famous portrait photograph of all of the blues musicians in Georgia in 2000. We took a picture in Piedmont Park that's kind of like that famous picture of Jackson in Central Park in New York. I was asked to be a part of that, and it's everybody. Like, I think the youngest blues musician in there is a teenager, and then there's a couple of blues musicians in there that, God, they were at 80 or 90 at the time. Like, it was everybody in Georgia. It was really a pretty big honor to be a part of it. And that portrait is hanging up some giant mural in the Georgia Music Hall of Fame. So like, I had done a good bit of stuff, but the rock band stuff that I had done between that and getting picked up by Fozzy was pretty far and few between. Like, it wasn't on my radar. And like, even though I grew up as a metal kid, like, metal wasn't on my radar. Like, I hadn't really kept up with a lot of anything. I bought Tool records because I was really into them. I kept up with Dream Theater because I was really into them. Kept up with Steve Vai and Joe Satriani and a handful of other rock stuff. But really, through the 90s, and I just bought records that I was interested in, whether they were symphonic records or jazz records. Different, I used that whole period to just really open myself up to as much of music history and as much of recorded music history as I could, not just the narrow path of being a metal guy or just a rock guy. So it kind of came from nowhere, but I kind of came from everywhere, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I follow what you're saying, and I read that during this time that you did some session guitar work as well. I think it was on your website that I read that. Was this stuff kind of involved in that session work, or was that something separate that you did?
It's kind of everything. Like, one of the things that I kind of set myself up to do is just to be an independent musician. So I've always sort of worked for myself, pretty much since I got out of high school. I have either been an independent contractor that hired myself out to other bands as a side guy, or getting to know studio owners and producers and being a guitar player on, either guesting on somebody's records or being a ghost musician where I played on records where maybe it was a younger rock band and maybe they just weren't really, and ready for the studio, to where, like, basically they were going to take way too much time in the studio to get them to do things efficiently. So they would hire me to come in and just fill in guitar spots, and make sure, not to, it happens more in the music industry than you might want to believe, that, these ghost musicians come in and play stuff, for the people who are actually famous for being in the band can't do it, either because studio inexperience or just budget constraints, or maybe there's too much partying going on and, they're just not with it enough to get through the studio experience. So that was kind of a lot of that stuff. It was a great experience for me, especially now that I'm producing records and I'm engineering records and I'm mixing records now, that between having an educational experience that I can write down all of the black dots for an ensemble that I want them to play. And that's really kind of like producing a record. It's like you're telling everybody what to do and what the volume is and all of that stuff. It's like you're writing all of that nuance onto the page. Between that and going into the studio and knowing how things work and knowing how to be the guy that gets a good performance and knowing how to listen to an engineer and listen to a producer so that they can get a good performance out of you, because that's tough. The first few times I went into the studio, it wasn't that I went in with an ego or anything, but I really wasn't ready for a producer to tell me, I don't like what you're doing, do this, and not take it personally. It really wasn't personal. It was a factor of being the guy for the job, but being able to give the producer what they needed for the session and them seeing the big picture and you just providing them that tiny little slice. So it was a great learning experience leading up to me starting to engineer records, because I knew at that point how I reacted to certain types of instruction in the studio or certain types of atmosphere and different types of sessions, whether they were singer-songwriter sessions, demos, full albums, ghosting a guitar player, parts for bands and stuff like that. So it was kind of part and parcel that sort of thing was in and around everything that I was doing, but it wasn't a piece of, this was the band I was working in, so I was doing this. It's kind of like that whole thing where you get in and you network with as many artists, producers, engineers, studio owners, band leaders, just everything. You kind of hang your sign of business out there, and you just do everything you can to make the telephone ring. That's kind of more my job than anything, is just making sure that the phone rings. Because it doesn't matter if I'm a decent musician or I can write a decent tune or play the guitar pretty good. If I can't make the phone ring, I don't work. So that's kind of the thing. Like I see all of that as a part of everything.
Right. Now, as far as making the phone ring, I see that back in May, you actually were part of an Aristocrats gig. You opened up for Guthrie Govan, Brian Beller, Marco Miniman, and
yeah,
and you did a gig there. How'd you get involved in that? Was that one of those things where it's like you shook enough hands and somebody's like, oh, let's bring Mike Martin in, or did you have to go after that and to get that gig?
It's a great question. It's a little bit of all of that stuff. That gig was at a venue in Nashville called the Rutledge. And my now manager, David Lowry at the Lowry Agency, he promotes a lot of shows out of the Rutledge. And he had been in the venue and saw the information for the show coming up, saw the promotion. And he asked the bar owner, because they're friends, and said, hey, who's opening up the show? And he's like, I don't think we have anybody yet. And he's like, well, I have an artist who's perfect for this show. If they're looking for an opener, let me have it. So it kind of knowing the right people, there's always a thing of you have to be in the right place at the right time. And if you know enough people who are in the right place at the right time, it kind of helps your chances of getting the good phone calls for good gigs like that. So that was sort of that, is having a good manager who's very well connected, and he's just on point. He's always open to possibilities for not just me, but for all of his artists. He's got John Finn, another amazing guitar player, Rob Balducci, great band Mindset Defect, and Goldilocks. And all of us, we're all doing very different things. And he's just really good at what he does, man. He kind of keeps an ear to the ground for everybody, looking for opportunities for all of the different stuff. And maybe it helps that we're all just a little bit different, all very guitar-driven kind of stuff. So that kind of ties us all together. But man, that makes all the difference in the world, is having different people in lots of different places that can make those things happen. So for me, all of these years I've been working in the Southeast, I haven't avoided Nashville, but Nashville's kind of, it's one of those towns where everybody plays guitar and everybody's really good at it. So it's never really been on my radar to go to Nashville like I was going to take over that town, because that's just a foolish idea. That might have been something that a young Mike Martin would have thought he could have done. But, the wisdom of having seen enough guitar players who were from Nashville that were coming through Atlanta quickly taught me that you ain't going anywhere and teaching anybody anything, So having a manager that's based out of Nashville, and I've played Nashville a bunch of times at this point, whether it was in this really cool rock band I was in back in the early 2000s, a band called Jana, or playing through there with Stuck Mojo, or a few other projects, or just going to the NAMM shows up there and jamming with other people that are in and from around the area. It's just kind of cool to have people on the ground there looking for that stuff, because you can't avoid towns like that. It's like, I'd never wanted to move to Los Angeles either. And it's good to have friends that live there, because sometimes you don't get the phone call or the opportunity for something that you may be perfectly suited for, just by virtue of the fact that you're not there. Right. But having somebody who's there who might be in the right place at the right time, who could say, I know the perfect guy for you, and he's in Atlanta, let's give him a phone call. That stuff helps tremendously.
And it's phenomenal to have people in the music industry that actually are looking out for other people other than themselves. Because I've heard and seen some horror stories about that.
I've been really blessed. I don't know how to explain it, but even just growing up in the schools that I went to, was always surrounded by the coolest, well, not cool like the cool kids, but just the best people. Like the kids I grew up with were all really good kids, and they all came from really good families. Not that they were wealthy towns or any of that stuff. They were just good people. Like, it's really funny. And the music scene here in Atlanta, there are so many guitar players here, and some of my favorite guitar players on the planet live here, and we've played together. And there's no competitive whatever. It's we're all different flavors of ice cream, and we all kind of like to hang out at Baskin Robbins together. It's really cool. Like, you know, just for example, like,
guitars.
Yeah, like Rich Ward is a great guitar player, and he's one of my favorite guitar players, and he happens to be from Atlanta, and he's completely different from anything that I do. There's also Oliver Wood from the Wood Brothers, who sounds nothing like me. So completely different. He's one of the groovinest, funkiest, earthiest guitar players I've ever heard. He's amazing. And to play with him is a joy. And he's also one of those guys I just love to hear him play. Like, he keeps me inspired. Guys like Rich and Oliver, and there's other guys, Randy Chapman, Chris Duarte lives here. He's another one of my favorite guitar players. Like, I'm so surrounded by just the coolest guitar players. They all do very different things, and they're all so unique unto themselves. And we're all friendly, you know. There's no competitive sort of, I got to make sure nobody hears that guy's name because I want to make sure I get that phone call. It's not like that at all. It's like when we get together, we promote each other's stuff. We like to hang out together. We like to make music together. It really is a wonderful community. I've just been very lucky with that because I've been to other towns where it ain't like that. You go to Chicago, it ain't like that. You go to Boston, it is not like that. You go to LA, it is not like that. And when other musicians from other parts of the country or other parts of the world come here, and I used to host a bunch of jams in Atlanta, and like all sorts of different musicians would come in and out of the door. And they were like, you have the most supportive music scene here. Not necessarily in the rock scene, because the rock scene here is really weird. But in terms of that blues, jazz, jam band, I don't know what you call it kind of thing. Just like there's a group of musicians here and we all play music and that's all there is to it. You know, and some of it's out of that Allman Brothers, government mule kind of rock scene where it's jammy. There's a jammy side to it, but then there's a bunch of us like, I like Fish. I think Trey Anastasio is an amazing writer and amazing guitar player. And, you know, there are some people I know that hate bands like Fish because they're so weird and so loose and so close to the Grateful Dead and like, but I love all of this stuff. So I kind of branch out into all of these different aspects of music that I'm just interested in. And players from other parts of the country or the world will come to these jams and be like, how is it that you guys all get along? Like, this doesn't make sense. Like, this doesn't exist. We're kind of like a black swan or a wormhole. It's like, nobody's seen this. This doesn't really happen. This doesn't exist. And for some reason here, it kind of does. It's really cool. I'm very fortunate that I happen to be here through this particular period of time where there are all these really amazing and inspirational musicians around doing all kinds of different stuff. And I get to work with them and hang out with them and see them play all the time. And they come and see me play. And it's really different.
Now, with that music scene where everybody's kind of like brotherly guitarist love and everything, fast forwarding to 2005, that I believe was the first time I saw you in Fozzy. You made an appearance in the Enemy video, and how did you actually get invited into that? I know Ryan Malum, the previous lead guitarist for that band, had left, and so the call went out to you from who?
It came from Sean Delson initially. And again, Sean and I have known each other since I first moved to Atlanta in the early 90s. And that's when I met Rich and the Mojo guys. And back then, Sean was in a band called Salem Ash with Doug Busby and Frank Fonseray and Sean's brother Corey. That was the band. So I got to be very friendly with those guys way back then. And I don't even remember how we got to be such good friends because I'm a few years younger than everybody too. Like they were all kind of established and I was this kind of young kid, goofy looking, trying to make my way and just get on the scene. And just through whatever process of just hanging out at gigs and being personable and networking, we got to be good friends at the time, me, Sean, and Doug. And Frank and Corey as well, but probably more Sean and Doug with me. And Sean at the time, he was like the chief foreman at a landscaping company. And everybody, and I mean everybody that played rock music in and around Atlanta at some point needed a job. At some point, Sean got them a job working for this landscaping company. I mean, it's comical. Like everybody came through that landscaping company. And I was no different. Sean had gotten a gig, and I had worked there for a long time as well, just trying to make my bills while I was trying to take over the world with my guitar. So flash forward from the 90s into the early 2000s when I'd gotten out of college. I was that band Jana that I mentioned. I had gone out to see them play at Smith Soul Bar here in Atlanta. Their keyboardist was leaving. And the reason I got in that band Jana, the keyboard player was leaving, and they asked me to replace him, but not playing keyboards, but playing guitar synthesizer, because everybody knew that I was into all of that weird Adrian Belew kind of guitar synth stuff. So I had come out to see the band, and I had friends in the band as well, like Rick Shoemaker, who's played in my band, and he and I played in a bunch of different projects together. He was the percussionist for that band, so I was going out to support anyway. And when I got there, this must have been in 2000. Agent Cooper was opening up for Jana at Smith Soul Bar, and I had not seen Doug and Sean and Eric Frampton, any of them, in probably 3 or 4 years. So it was a nice surprise. I didn't know that they had started a band called Agent Cooper. It was kind of a wonderful reunion of just, wow, there's all these really great friends in the room, and of course there were friends who were out to see friends play and stuff. And Doug and I got to talking that night. And subsequently ended up moving in together. And part of the idea was he was really interested in bringing in a second guitar player into Agent Cooper. He was doing all the guitar stuff, and Doug is a fantastic guitar player, but he was really looking to bring in a second guitar player. So we ended up moving in together. We did some writing together at the time before their second record, Beginner's Mind, came out, which I didn't play on that record, and I don't think, I remember kicking some ideas around with Doug, but I didn't contribute to that album in any way. We had rehearsed a bunch of times, so we had played some old Salem Ash tunes at a studio party here, which was kind of fun. So Sean had gotten very familiar with my playing at that particular point. If he didn't remember my playing from the 90s when we were hanging out and I was a young punk, he got a good earful of it then, because I was pretty unashamed with my chops and stuff. And they would come out and see me play. I had this band called the Hybrids, and we played a lot of these fusion joints around town. So they pretty much knew what I was up to. So the story goes, when Ryan decided that it was time for him to bow out, and Ryan does so many different stuff. And I know Ryan now. I didn't know him at the time. He had gone to law school, and he's a swim coach. Like he does all kinds of stuff, and he's a really interesting guy. And he's married, he's got a family, and it was a big decision for him to step out from that stuff. And he's a great guitar player. All that playing that he did on All That Remains, really great playing. Can't say enough good things about the guy. It was a hard decision, and he made the call, and I think he dropped that on everybody while they were out on the road. And Rich and Sean got to talking about it. Well, how do we do this? Where are we going to go from here? Because All That Remains was recorded. It was getting ready to come out. They were going through that whole process of, do they do it as an independent label, like they ended up doing it on Ash Records, or they look for a label to sign it? There's all of this business concerns going on, and now, the guitar player is leaving. And this was the time when Rich and Chris had decided that, there's no more Wigs, there's no more Moon Goose McQueen and all of that stuff. They're going to be a real band and really go for it. So this is not good news for them. So when Rich and Sean were talking about it, and God bless Sean for having the faith in me, you know, he pretty much told Rich, there's one guy I know, if he will do it, he's pretty much the only guy I know that would be the guy to do this. So when they got home from that particular road trip, Sean called me and we had a long conversation because I had just gone through an experience with another friend of mine's band, a progressive hard rock band called Man on Fire. I'm still very good friends with those guys too. But they had put out a record, hired me. I'd done a bunch of gigs with them, and unfortunately the project just wasn't going anywhere partly because Atlanta's just not a good place to be in a prog rock band. It's not a prog town. So it was frustrating. We weren't working as much as we wanted to, but that kind of music requires a lot of time. You need to rehearse a lot. You need to keep it fresh because it's difficult to play. And it was taking up a lot of my time as an independent musician. Like, I make my money sitting in with other bands and doing all that stuff. And they had regular day jobs to keep their bills paid. So they wanted to rehearse at night. Of course, I worked at night. So it got to an impasse with those guys. So I had, like, within the couple months before that, had just said, man, the next time I get in a band, you know, and Man on Fire was on a record label. And so Jonna had been, it's like, the next band has got to be real. It's got to be happening. It's got to be on the road. I need to get picked up by a band that's traveling. So we had a long talk about all of that stuff. And I think Doug had talked with Rich too, because it was about that time that Rich didn't remember me from the night. And there's no reason that he should have. It wasn't like my band opened for his band or anything like that. I didn't get my bands up and rolling, partly because we were a little too shred foo, I guess. So I didn't really have that same luxury. And by the time Mojo was really taken off, it was off my radar. Like, of course, everybody knows the lore, or maybe everybody doesn't know the lore of Stuck Mojo, but they had their first record was signed by Century Media and put out in 1995. And I was already off and going to college at that point. So, like, I was living in Charleston, South Carolina. I was kind of out of the scene. So at that point, you know, Mojo became legendary, and I was not here participating in any of that stuff. So Rich had never heard me play guitar. He didn't know anything about me, so he was kind of looking into me a bit and talked with Doug a bit, and Doug gave me a glowing endorsement as well, and we all got together and had lunch and did an audition. The rest, as they say, is Fozzy history.
And you got to bypass all of the wigs.
Yes, because fortunately I still had enough hair to qualify. I was more concerned about wearing a frilly shirt and maybe leather pants, because I do not look good in leather pants. So it's not good. Like, you don't want that.
Oh, well, I think it worked out pretty well for you. That's where I met you. The last time I saw you face to face was back in 2008, actually, in Raleigh, North Carolina, playing with Stuck Mojo. And it has been a while.
Yeah, it has.
But right before that, back in April 2008, you and Rich went on tour with Andy Sneap's band Sabbath. And they did a four tour date run of the U.S. And you were doing guitar tech and he was doing managing. And I caught up with you guys then. And can you tell us just...
We played through Jack's.
Right, yeah. The Jack's Club in West Springfield, Virginia, back in April 2008. Yeah, can you tell us a little bit about that that experience with those guys and your whole experience with guitar teching instead of actually being the man playing the guitar on stage?
You know, that was a lot of fun. Basically, here's the setup for that. Rich and Andy are really good friends, and I've gotten to know Andy through that relationship. We did some Stuck Mojo recording at Sneap's studio in Derby, England, and it's beautiful. He has an amazing facility. It's just so, I can't say enough good stuff about it. If you see some pictures on his website of his facility, it's absolutely gorgeous. And Sneap is a character. In any way. Sneap had, because Sneap had played on some of the early Fozzy stuff and did some gigs with Fozzy. He was Lord Edgar Baden Powell, I think is what his stage name was, and he was kind of the almost the token Faulty Towers, Monty Python aspect of Fozzy back in that period. But anyway, Sneap is an amazing guitar player, and Sabbath had never toured the States. They kind of had some really great notoriety when they were really active in the 90s. Really good records, and just the fact that they never made it over either probably says more about what the state of rock music and hard rock music, and Sabbath's kind of a thrash metal band anyway, what the state of music was here in the United States in the 90s, which kind of explains why I didn't do much playing here in the 90s.
Right.
So for whatever circumstances, Sneap had been doing some Sabbath gigs, and there had been an offer for Sabbath to come over and do some shows in the States. New York, Chicago, LA, and I guess technically Virginia, as close to DC as we got. So when they were talking about that, the idea of flying more people and getting work permits and visas from the UK to come over to the States, or just picking up me and Rich, because we had just seen Andy on the last Mojo tour we had just done, because whenever we got an opportunity to even just go out and get a curry dinner or something, we will always try to do that. So that's what was going on. And the sound man for that tour was a good friend of mine, James Dunkley, who at the time was also my artist relations rep for PV amplifiers. So he was running sound, and he had run sound for Mojo and for Fozzy lots of times too. So it was kind of like this big family thing. Playing bass for Sabbath on that tour was Giz Butt. For those who don't know Giz, he was playing in a band called, we toured with them with Stuck Mojo in a band called The More I See. He also plays with, or had played with the English Dogs, and he played in The Prodigy for a while. And Giz is an amazing guitar player, frightening guitar player, and he's playing bass for Sabbath on this tour. So it was too much fun not to do this tour. And basically the idea was Rich was going to be the tour manager, just to take care of the ins and outs and all of the concierge kind of stuff that you need done, because, he knows the States really well. And certainly all of us have done those types of fly-in dates and shuttling with picking up rental vans and getting gear from here to there. So Rich was a great guy to have doing that. Plus, very trustworthy, because he and Sneap had a long-term relationship at this point. And they just needed one guy, just me, just to kind of make sure guitars were there and the stages were set up and all of that stuff. And it was a really easy gig. It's not like they needed a tech or even much of a guitar tech for me. Like, Andy really takes care of his own guitars. And I think there was a couple of times just from the flying, I did a little bit of setup work on tweaking some necks and stuff for him. But, it really had more to do with, making sure that if there was a battery in his wireless unit, that he had a fresh battery in every day, that he didn't have to worry about little things like that. And it was fun. That was a fun tour. Like, it was so short, but at the same time, like, I don't think at that point that James Dunkley had ever been to the United States before, or at least if he had been, he'd never been working a tour before. So there was, a lot of that fun, first time in the States kind of thing. Plus just the comedy that always ensues when you're running around with a rock band anywhere. It really was a good time. I can't say enough good things about that little tour. It was a blast.
I remember standing out back of the Jacks, because I had just talked to you, and you were like, okay, well, we're bringing stuff in. So can you go stand over by the guitars and equipment and make sure that nobody just comes up and takes anything? And so I went back there, and I was standing by the guitars, and Giz walks out the back door of the Jacks, and he looks over at this little white kid standing next to all of his equipment, and he walks over, doesn't say a word to me, and just, like, stands next to it as well. And I look at him like, oh, it's all right. Mike told me to go stand here, and he's like, if it's all right with you, I don't know who you are. So I'm just going to stand here and make sure you don't take anything. But I mean, you got to be careful about things like that because I could just have been anybody. But
anybody can say anything. Oh, I know so and so. They told me to be over here.
Yeah, and
I do exactly the same thing because that kind of stuff does happen where if word doesn't get transmitted that somebody knows somebody and introduced them and said he's cool, he's going to be right here helping me out. There's been plenty of times I've been in a similar situation where it's like, hey, who's that fucking guy over there by my guitar? Oh, that's so-and-so. Really? Well, I don't know so-and-so. It's never a personal thing, but when you're on tour like that, like everybody's got horror stories of guitars getting stolen or pedals or just, sometimes people's just bags, their personal bags because, a fan, has an affinity for an artist and just wants a token, a souvenir or something like that. And it's stealing in some people's warped moral sensibility is an acceptable way to do that. Which, so you're kind of always on the defensive when you're on tour because you're always running into new people, even if people don't necessarily want to steal a guitar, they know you're a musician and you're hanging out. Chances are you probably got cash on you, so you can get robbed. You may have a laptop, you may have an iPhone or something like that. So it kind of happens. You kind of naturally put your defenses out there. It only takes one good, bad experience, having a gun pulled on you someplace or something like that, or having your car broken into or your trailer stolen or anything, before you end up just kind of naturally just always checking your six,
Yeah. Hopefully you haven't had any guns pulled on you on tour. But I guess you've heard of someone who has.
I've heard lots of stories, and I have been around situations where there was the threat of somebody pulling a gun, and there was no reason to believe that those individuals did not have a gun. And just fortunately, those situations never turned into a really bad situation like they could have. But they're out there. I mean, lots of stuff has happened to lots of different musicians. I've been very fortunate that any of my bad stories really aren't that bad. They're nowhere near that bad. I have skated tragedy many, 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 many times.
Now, your solo album, 2 of 5, came out back in 2005, 2006?
2006.
2006, yeah. I picked it up when I went to my first Stuck Mojo gig, when they went on a tour for the preliminary hearings tour to kind of... there was the whole reunion with Bones, and they were about to release Southern Born Killers, and they went on tour, and I'd seen you on the Enemy video. I kind of knew who you were, and there your CD was for sale up on the Stuck Mojo merch table. So I was like, oh sure, yeah, let me grab that. It's a fantastic album, and now it is out for it's on Digital Nations, which is Steve Vai's label, a subsidiary of Favored Nations.
Yes.
How did you get on to Favored Nations, and maybe tell us a little bit about the recording process for that album?
I'll tackle the Favored Nations things first. That was kind of always the design. There's not many labels in existence that deal with instrumental guitar music. And Favored Nations had been around since before I had started working on that record. So it had always been my intention to submit it to somebody there. It just so happened that when I was working on the record and kind of doing my preliminary, what labels might be interested in this, Favored Nations was not accepting any submissions. Which was kind of heartbreaking. They were putting out records like Marty Friedman's Music for Speeding had come out. I think Eric Johnson's Bloom record was out on Favored Nations. If it wasn't that one, it was the Alien Love Child record, that live record came out on Favored Nations. My friend Rob Balducci, he had put out, is it the Color of Light record? Or Violet Horizon? I think Violet Horizon came out after that. But anyway, like, records were coming out, but they were already signed guys. They weren't taking any other submissions. And it was pretty clear they weren't taking unknown people anyway. Like, even if they were going to sign a new record, they were really only putting out records by already established artists. So it only left a few other labels like Mascot, Lion Music, so on and so forth. And I got to know some of the Mascot people through touring with Fozzy and with Stuck Mojo, because we kept running into people that had mutual friends. Again, just knowing people that know people, just trying to get a foot in the door to submit some of the early mixes to people before I finished the record, just trying to get a budget for it, really. And it was kind of frustrating. It wasn't going as well as I had hoped for. So that's why I ultimately just put it out myself in 2006. I just created Serpa Records as a means to get it out and be able to broker and license distribution. That way I could have it out on the merch stand for any tours that we were doing. And unfortunately, it came out after most of the touring I had done with Fozzy. Like, that really would have been the band to have it on the merch stand. I sold a few copies while I was in Stuck Mojo, but really, it's a huge disconnect between styles of music. People that were into Stuck Mojo, very few of them were the kind of people who would buy a Satriani or a Steve Vai record. They were into more metal, especially people that were, voracious Stuck Mojo fans. You're talking about people who were really into Rising and Cakewalk. Those are very aggressive records. And 205 is aggressive, but nowhere near that kind of a metal record. So I sold a handful, on the merch stand over the years that I had a tenure with Stuck Mojo. But really, I could have sold more in Fozzy, because in Stuck Mojo, I was the rhythm guitar player and Rich's lead guitar player. And that was the right answer. In Fozzy, I was the lead guitar player, and I had a little bit more of, I kind of had my soapbox to put all of my chops on display for people who were wowed by that kind of thing. It was a good place for them to see it, and could have gotten a lot more people to buy the record that way. And probably more of my sales have gone since then to that audience than to the Stuck Mojo audience. And that's right. So anyway, flashing forward, any of the labels that I looked to broker distribution with didn't work. Like, the last really big push that I did was when Stuck Mojo was on tour with Volbeat. Volbeat was sort of the biggest band on Mascot Kovog records at the time. So all of the upper executives were coming out to the Volbeat shows. Of course, they were checking out Stuck Mojo. We had already signed that deal with Napalm for the re-release of Southern Born Killers and The Great Revival. So all of that business dealing was already done. So I had met with them and gave them copies of 205 to see if they were interested in distributing that one, and if they'd be interested in picking up my next record, which I was very interested in getting to work on writing. The trail kind of went cold at that particular point. And I don't think it was because Mascot wasn't interested. It's just kind of the nature of the way things happened after that tour. Like, The Great Revival came out, and I think we were all disappointed that, whatever our expectations were of Napalm Records at that point, we were disappointed in the way that was going. Whether our expectations were realistic or unrealistic, doesn't matter. That record kind of came out. It's like we did that tour before the record came out, and the record just kind of went out, and it wasn't reviewed well, because it was kind of, for a Stuck Mojo record, it was really somewhere between Stuck Mojo meets The Duke, which for us as a business, that was the right answer, because Stuck Mojo, as a very aggressive metal band, wasn't doing what we wanted it to do anyway. So we were really going for a different demographic. But when all of the reviews and the reviewers that the album was sent out to was sent to people, who were expecting, Declaration of a Headhunter Part 2, of course they were disappointed that there were only, maybe 3 or 4 really aggressive tunes on the record. And then there's Country Road, a weird song that is somewhere written between Rich Ward, John Denver, and Mike Martin. Like, that's really weird. That probably shouldn't exist on a quote-unquote Stuck Mojo record if you're familiar with the band. But in our heads, it's kind of where we were. It seemed like the right answer, for where we wanted to go. It didn't work. So the disappointment over that, and diving right into that, was immediately Rich went into working on Chasing the Grail. So everything kind of became about that, and just sort of, well, what do we do with all this Mojo stuff? So I kind of dropped the ball on really trying to be pushy with the Mascot guys, because I didn't really know where my career was at that particular moment. I knew we were going to do something with Fozzy, but I didn't know what. I mean, we had just put all of our eggs on this other record that, now we were kind of just abandoning. So it was through that period of, working on my contributions to Chasing the Grail, and just kind of keeping up with other elements of what's going on online, just, trying to see what's going on with fans, what happened with, our reputation with the Stuck Mojo thing, trying to capitalize on the new fans from the whole Volbeat tour stuff, because Volbeat was getting huge traction, and just, because I was kind of doing a lot of the marketing for Stuck Mojo. I created the Facebook page and all of that stuff. So I was really trying to connect with, all of the people that we really had the luxury of being in front of. We had some really good press with Metal Edge magazine was still in existence, so we had some good feature articles there. While we were on the Volbeat tour, we were on the cover of Art Shock magazine. There was some good stuff that was happening. Just trying to make sure we didn't lose all that stuff. Trying to keep up with where are these people and where are we on their radar, and let's just make sure we're keeping contact with these folks. And in the process of doing that, flashing forward to how did I end up on Favored Nations? I saw a blurb from Favored Nations on, I think it was a Facebook thing, about just experiment, new label, just looking to see who's out there, what's going on. So I called Sean, my A&R guy now at Favored Nations, just to say, hey, man, what's going on with this? And he kind of explained the deal about, doing all digital distribution, trying to be a little forward-thinking and stuff. And I explained to him who I was and this record that I had and, being in Fozzy and Stuck Mojo and all of this stuff. And I was like, maybe this is a good opportunity for some cross-pollination thing here, because I don't have much of a name, in terms of Mike Martin, certainly means more to say Fozzy or Stuck Mojo than it does to say Mike Martin, because in all of my tenure with those bands, I really spent more time just trying to be the best possible member of those bands than trying to be some kind of pariah and be like, I'm all about my self-promotion. It's all about, the Mike Martin thing, the Mike Martin thing, the Mike Martin thing. Really just wanted to be Mike from Fozzy, or Mike from Stuck Mojo, that it was more about the promotion of the band, because that's a better gig. I didn't want to be a side guy in Fozzy. I didn't want to be a side guy in Stuck Mojo, and that's not what we did. Those were bands. That's honest to God what we were trying to do. So we served it up that way. So it was a little bit of an opportunity for some cross promotion with the label. So we signed a deal with them for 205 to get that stuff distributed. And it's kind of interesting. It's all digital distribution. So I already had it in all the major digital distribution networks worldwide through what I had done with CD Baby already. So I had to take it down so we could put it back up. Except now I can put Steve Vai's name on everything. So it was worth the effort. It was good to do that. So that's kind of how that happened, was through that whole process of I had been looking for distribution to license since 2006, but just through the process of, doing, all of the touring for Fozzy and all of the touring with Stuck Mojo, and then being brought in as a member of Stuck Mojo and doing 2 records with them and doing all of those, writing and so on and so forth. It just took a much longer process, and that's fine. It really was the smarter way to go about it, because it's not like the world is on fire for the next great instrumental guitar record. Steve Vai himself just put out a new record, and it's a great record called The Story of Light. But I don't know how well it's doing. Like, everybody's doing such soft numbers now. Like, I'm sure it's a niche market, so guitar players are buying it. Like, Steve's going to sell the copies he's going to sell to the people that follow him everywhere. So he'll probably do better numbers than most folks. Certainly, numbers well beyond what I can do. But I'm sure it's still less numbers than his last record, because that's just the nature of where and how many records are being sold. So that's the Favored Nation story. Now, recording the record is kind of interesting. Basically, what I did, I'll try to give you the shortest story possible on that, because clearly I'm a little long-winded.
It's fine.
The story is, I had been doing all the session work for years leading up to it, and at this point now I had been in the studio working on the Duke record with with Rich, and through that process, we worked with Sean Grove in the mixing process. We worked with Cheney Brannon at his studio. So it's getting to work in bigger and bigger studios with, better and better producers and engineers and stuff. So like my ears were really opening up to this. And Rich was getting into becoming his own producer and his own engineer. He had worked with Rick Beato on All That Remains and on a good chunk of the Duke record. The original 3-song demo was produced by Rick Beato, and that's kind of what spurned it on into the whole My Kung Fu Is Good album, carrying those ideas forward. So Rich was growing in this whole Pro Tools revolution to where you could have a pretty slick Apple computer and have Pro Tools, and you could do a lot of tracking work on your own, whether you do it at your rehearsal space, which is where we did a lot of stuff, or at your home studio, which is eventually what I ended up building, and that's what he's ended up building as well. Just through that process and seeing how possible that is. So, through being in Fozzy and doing those tours, I basically, any earnings that we did make, I just reinvested that money into a Pro Tools studio. I got myself an M-Box and bought the slickest version of Pro Tools I could at the time. And in between tours, I don't remember exactly what it was going on, but that particular year, that was 2005. We had done that first Stuck Mojo tour with Bones in Europe after some UK dates with Fozzy. Came back to the States, finished the Duke record, or I can't remember if we finished the Duke record or we were getting the Duke record finished, but we did that short tour with the Duke that spring, and Fozzy headlined the Astoria. We did the Duke show at that was the weirdest tour because we did Stuck Mojo shows and Fozzy shows and the Duke. Like that tour was everything. We did everything that I did in that tenure with all of those different projects. We did all of them in that 2-week period in the UK. It was kind of awesome. Then we came back home. We flew back to England and did a couple of dates. We did the Donington Festival, Download, which was really kind of awesome. It was in that period when we came home from there. That's when I bought Pro Tools, and I bought myself a book written by John Keane, who's a producer in Athens, Georgia, who worked with REM and all of those bands. He wrote this really great tutorial on Pro Tools. If you're interested in that stuff, I highly recommend it because he's kind of a practical engineer. He's like, you can read the book on all of the keystrokes on everything about what Pro Tools does. He said, but let me tell you what an engineer needs to know, coming from having worked with tape and ADATs and all of that stuff into here. So basically, I did that entire tutorial in a ridiculously short period of time, but I'm kind of stupid that way. Like if I'm going to study something, if I'm going to read a book, I'll read it from cover to cover because I'll get distracted. I kind of need to be zen-like on things. So I just immersed myself in that, learned it all, and then immediately started working on 205. That was my pre-production, was learning that book. And then between that little period, doing all of the pre-production, setting up all of the sessions and starting, I've written a lot of that music previous to this. If you've read the liner notes to the album, there's one song called Lavender. I wrote that when I was 18. The song's been around for a while. So it was kind of easy to just set up the sessions, and because I'd already written all of the music. It was just now getting it fleshed out in the studio. And then there were some songs, like 205 was written for the album 205. That was a brand new song for that. Infection was a song that I had not written out the whole thing, but I had written the song for My Kung Fu Is Good. Rich and I had talked at one particular point about my writing because he was kind of interested in it. So I kind of just started writing thinking, well, this would be an interesting song for this project. Not with any expectations that it was going to be on My Kung Fu Is Good, but just in the idea that was the kind of rock tune that it seemed like that band was going to play, like the big John Lord Hammond organs, Purple Harem kind of thing, plus some cool riffy guitar stuff, but still kind of melodic and had some swagger, and it never went that way. And by the time I got to 205 and working on that album, I liked that riff, so I kind of finished than, I didn't have a bunch of vocal melodies for it anyway, so I just wrote that whole thing as a chord melody for the guitar and all of that stuff. So that's kind of the thing. And then from there, it was, everything kind of became between tours. Like we had the Australian tour. So I had, and I didn't have a laptop. So I would have to work on my mixes, record them, and bring a CD player with me because I didn't even have an iPod at the time. And basically listen to my mixes over and over again and keep writing notes. Like I listened to my mixes every day and wrote brand new notes on everything just to see if this, and like I would compare notes by the end of the tour of, okay, what were the things that stood out to me consistently day after day after day? Like it didn't matter how redundant my notes were on my mixes and what I wanted to do next. I wanted to make sure that I had solidified those ideas in my mind. So that was kind of my process that I went through. So we did the Australian tour. I think we were home for 3 weeks to get back to work on the record. And then we had another UK tour. Somewhere in there, we had that US run that we had to cancel because Chris's mom passed. I don't remember exactly where that was in the running, if that was before Australia, after Australia, if that was 2006. Like, that gets a little fuzzy to me because we were touring so much. Then we did that Canadian tour. So it was all kind of in and around and between all of that stuff. Like we would be out for a while. It was really kind of disconnected in my head between, go out and do this Fozzy thing and then come home and do this instrumental thing, constantly picking up the hat, putting it on and then taking it off and then putting on this hat and then going out and doing this and then putting all that down when you come home and like, all right, go back into this mode. It was really an interesting and kind of wonderful experience for me to get to do so much different stuff. And so much was just, kind of like just being taken off with the whole Fozzy thing, because that was a really wonderful period of time in that band where we were doing some great touring, just having the best time. And finally, having the wherewithal and the platform to do stuff with my own music and like really getting excited about that stuff too. It was a really, really cool period of time for me.
That is a lot of taking the hat off and putting it back on when there's so much of that touring and coming back to it. It's amazing that you had like the focus to go, okay, well, now I got to get back and make sure that I get this record completed before Fozzy does anything else.
Yeah, it was like kind of, I want to get this done because if I could have theoretically, I could have gotten that done before the Australian tour. Like if I knew then what I know now, and that's always the way, by the time you finish a project, you know exactly how to do that project. Like you always walk into a project thinking, I want to do this, I want to do this, and I want to do this. And by the end of it, it's like life is what happens while you're busy making plans. It's like you can have all that stuff lined up and you just keep trying to get those things knocked out. But along the way, you have to what's the Marines credo? You have to adapt, improvise, all of that stuff. So knowing what I know now, it's possible to have gotten that record done in that period of time. And I would have loved to have had that record to sell on the Australian tour at the merch stand because we did great numbers in Australia on that tour. It would have been, just as a business standpoint of selling some albums, would have been great for me. As a matter of fact, it would have been so great that it probably would have spurned the ability to broker distribution for 205 much earlier because there were certainly enough record people around all of those Fozzy shows who probably would have wanted to have gotten a piece of some of that stuff. Same with those UK tours. Like that was the era of Fozzy where we were selling out complete tours, like everywhere we were going. And, there were some smaller venues in there because we were in some smaller markets as well because we were still growing. But even the bigger markets, we were selling out every place that we would get. It was amazing to be on tour, and then get the news for every next show coming up that tomorrow night sold out, 3 nights from now sold out. Like just the excitement on those tours of, the business really growing. Those would have been great tours to have that stuff, available for. Because after that, like it took me so long to get it done just because I was so new to the process. By the time, like I said, that I was done, that album cycle for All That Remains was pretty much over. We did some spotty shows from there, but really that was kind of it for a while until really Chasing the Grail. And at that point, if that record was done, I I was off of that project. So it's like I really kind of missed the boat at that point with that.
Right. Well, speaking of Chasing the Grail, your standout performance on that has to be the closing track, the near 14-minute long Wormwood about the end of the world, and after that you left the band, but that, from what I've read, is kind of the song that spurned going back and joining Agent Cooper. So can you tell us about the transition from Chasing the Grail with Wormwood to your days with Agent Cooper?
Yeah. Basically, Chris and I worked on that, because Rich is the primary songwriter for everything that he does, and we would all write our parts for anything. And there had been some conversations before working on what is now Chasing the Grail, where Rich was kind of open. He was like, man, I'd like you to, maybe do some writing, let me see what you got on the stuff. He had a bunch of lyrics from Chris. I was like, sure, let me take a look. So I had written around on some riffs and some things. I don't think I had any complete song ideas at that particular point, but, the ideas were out there, and the Fozzy record was kind of off the radar at that point. So I didn't really have a big reason to go finishing a bunch of demos for stuff, because we didn't know when we were going to do the next Fozzy record. We were all very focused on the Great Revival and getting that ship to sail, basically. And anything I was writing certainly was not good for Fozzy, not good for Stuck Mojo. It's pretty much how we all felt about the stuff that I was writing at the time. And Wormwood I didn't even have an idea for Wormwood yet. I had read over the lyrics, and they were a couple of pages of them. It was a long, epic poem kind of thing. And I knew what Chris was thinking. I mean, Chris and I, we're fans of the same stuff. We're big Iron Maiden fans. We're big Rush fans. We're big Dream Theater fans. I mean, all of that stuff it was all right there in his lyrics, that this is kind of what he would like to see happen. And it wasn't that I just kind of jumped on it. It's like, I kind of know what he's up to here. I don't have anything for it at the moment, but I know what he's up to here. So when Rich and I were talking later, he had basically demoed out everything that did become Chasing the Grail. He had all of the songs roughed in for all of that stuff. And I was like, well, hey, you had asked me to do some writing. I said, do you want to repurpose any of that stuff or take a look at it? Or, where are you in the album track listing? Is there room to get a song on here? Or, what kind of love can I get on here as a songwriter? And he's like, well, I've pretty much written everything I want to. He's like, I know you've written for stuff, but I've now kind of gone ahead and written for everything too. He's like, there's no point in having two competing ideas for the same sets of lyrics. I'm like, no, that's fine. He's like, but is there anything you haven't written yet? And he's like, well, there's this weird Wormwood thing that I have no idea what to do with, because it's long and it's weird, and I don't have anything for that. He's like, if you want to take a look at that. And there was a couple other ones. I think at that point he didn't have anything for Friday the 13th. So I was like, well, let me take a look at that one, and let me take a look at this Wormwood thing. And I immediately kind of got into the Friday the 13th thing, because, there was something a little more obvious as a rock tune for that one for me. So kind of had a chorus going and whatever, and was just in the process of starting to demo that, and finally got a thing on, it's kind of like fishing. I got a bite. I finally had an idea that struck me with Wormwood, and it kind of spurned out of, it's not on the record. I had this very heavy metal progressive kind of introduction to something. And it was the original introduction to Wormwood, and it wasn't working. But it's kind of interesting. It was something I was trying to repurpose onto Wormwood, and it was the thing that kind of led me into how to approach Wormwood. So if I didn't have it, I probably wouldn't have gotten what I did get on Wormwood, even though it was the oldest thing and it ended up getting thrown away first. But basically that little classical guitar part of the intro, that hit me one day, and the whole song really, if you listen very intently, the little themes and everything in and around the little rhythmic motifs and the little melodic motifs and some of that harmonic progression, everything about that 14-minute song is almost in almost all of it is in that little classical introduction. So like I went into the 6-day fever dream kind of thing around that. Like once I got that, I just went nuts. Didn't bathe, didn't brush my teeth, just work. And like finally at one point I was like, all right, guys, I got something, and sent out a demo. And Chris was excited because it's got sort of a Farewell to Kings thing going on. It's got sort of a Rime of the Ancient Mariner thing going on. It's got there's like all of these really cool things that we're fans of. It's like I had touched on just enough of all of that stuff that we're both really into to where Chris was nuts for it. I was pretty proud of it. Rich dug it, got a green light, and we just went into it. And in the process from there, it was sort of, I was kind of heading up that project. So I got together with Sean and with Eric Frampton, who, Eric had done all of the keyboard recording for all of the Mojo stuff and the Duke project and the Fozzy stuff. Whenever we needed tracks for stuff, Rich would go to Eric for that stuff. And I do as well. I mean, he's playing on 205. He's, been a musician I've worked with for many, many years. Just in the process of working at that, of going, okay, well, I know what I want here. Give me this kind of thing. It turned into, like, it's so progressive that just the conversation after spending a weekend with Sean and Eric of what's going on here? Because this is really weird for a Fozzy song. Like this, because the conversation immediately became about, man, I can't wait to play this. When we go on tour, I was excited because I can't wait to play this. This is so much fun. And then just the realization of this song is too long. We're never going to play this. And also the fact that this is really kind of quirky in the set anyway. Like when I think about what a Fozzy set is and what I had written, it's kind of, I wrote it for Fozzy. In my mind, it's very much a Fozzy tune. Because it was definitely written to the strengths of what the band Fozzy was all about. But it was kind of weird. I got this feeling of we're never going to play this tune except for maybe a very special occasion. Like, I can't imagine that. And just in talking with Sean and Eric about that, it's like, that's a shame. This is the kind of writing that I'm getting into. It's maybe heavier than we wanted to do with Agent Cooper, but just that talk of, we want to do stuff with Agent Cooper, and it's this kind of stuff that we can do with Agent Cooper. So it was kind of spurned out of that conversation of, getting excited about things that I was writing, and certainly the more progressive rock nature of what I was writing, that really, I think in the end, probably Chris, Rich, and I, and Sean, and Eric, and Frank would all step back and go, that really isn't, it's cool for Fozzy. It's a really cool feature of that record. I'm really proud of the fact that, it held up on the album, sonically, that, it reviewed well. It's one of the songs that gets name mentioned every time that the record gets reviewed. And, really the only negative stuff I've heard about is that some people felt like it kind of maybe drags on too long as a 14-minute tune. But then on the other side of that, a lot of people feel like, wow, it's 14 minutes, but it doesn't feel like it. It's like it's so audio theater, that it you move from one thing to the next thing so quickly that by the end you're like, wow, it's over. And 15 minutes of my life have just passed. It's kind of funny that way. But even in all of that stuff, that people accepted it and fans accepted it, and I'm really grateful for that because, I'm certainly a fan of Rich's writing and his producing. Like, I wouldn't have been in the band if I wasn't a fan of his writing. Like, every project I've ever been a part of, I'm a mercenary that wants to go out and work and get paid. But on the other side is I don't want to do anything I don't have to do. Like, if I think your band is crap and you want to pay me to play in your band, I'm not going to do it. That's a great project. And, again, like I said earlier, I'm a fan of Rich's and I always have been. So it's, an honor to be in the band and get to play with him every night. And then to have a song on a record where, Rich is the primary songwriter. I mean, that's a huge, for me, it's a personal, not necessarily victory, but just, what an honor. It's really cool to have that and to have worked with Chris on all of that stuff. But through that process of just realizing that, I don't know that there's necessarily a good way to say it. It wasn't the factor of thinking that maybe I'm outgrowing Fozzy, but kind of knowing that I'm always going to really find myself as a piece of Fozzy, but an opportunity like being in a band like Agent Cooper is maybe a better place for this kind of stuff. You know, it's not like I didn't have a vehicle with my own stuff. Like, if I cared to sing Wormwood, I guess I could go play it now because I'm always doing gigs with my solo band. But I don't sing like that. You know, right. As a matter of fact, I have a laughable rock voice. You know, it's like if you ever heard me sing lead vocal, it's a comedy number. It's like, it's funny. Like, we were in the studio doing some vocals for the Agent Cooper album, and Doug really wanted me to sing some parts. And he was like, just get in there and do it. I'm like, you're going to laugh at me. He's like, I'm not going to laugh at you. I want a different voice. You've got a good voice, and just do it. And immediately, it's just comedy. And like, I have to laugh at myself. You know, I can't be self-conscious about it. I grew up in church singing in, you know, the high Catholic Gothic church choir. And that is exactly what I sound like. I have a voice that is more suited for singing in a Catholic Gothic choir, or I sound like Ethel Merman. I should be, you know, in a musical theater troupe or something like that. And that's not even a bad thing. I think it's a good thing. People who are good at that stuff are great at that. And that's kind of what my strength is as a singer. But I want to be a rock and roll musician. And I don't think anybody to hear a rock band fronted by Ethel Merman. I just don't think it's going to work.
Yeah, I'm not sure I'd go to see that show.
I mean, you'd go and throw tomatoes at them or something. But so anyway, that's kind of how it veered off into Agent Cooper land, is that we were all very excited about this stuff that I was writing. And you know, Agent Cooper was kind of in the same place that I was with 205 at the time, is they had put out Beginner's Mind right around 2005 when we were doing all that Fozzy touring. And it's a great record. Beginner's Mind is just, it's a great record, man.
That's fantastic.
And because of all of the touring that Sean was doing with Fozzy, like, Sean was able to get the word out about the record, but it's not like we could turn around, or at the time they could turn around and do a bunch of touring with Agent Cooper based on that. Because in the end, we'd come back to Atlanta, and, you know, you can't do progressive rock gigs around Atlanta, you know, and expect to draw huge numbers. It just doesn't work. We've done a handful of gigs since I've been in the band before we did this past European tour. And they were well enough attended, but that's because we did one show with Mike Froge's band, The Dreaded Marco. And if you don't know Mike Froge, you know, he was in Double Drive, and they did a couple of records for MCA and Universal, so he's well known. And at that point, he had already been playing drums for Black Label Society for a year, you know, so he's pretty well known from that. So drawing, you know, his local draw is pretty good, because, you know, his local boy done real well. We also did another show with Billy Gray's band, Dangerous New Machine, and Frank Fonserio was playing drums. I mean, it's pretty cool. There's the whole Fozzy tie-in. So, you know, Billy has stepped back into Fozzy since I left. So that was really cool that we did a show together and all of that stuff. And that show drew pretty well. And I don't know if part of that was because me and Billy were doing a show together and people didn't know what to think about that. I don't know why anybody might think it would be weird, because, you know, Billy's a super great guy, and, you know, we get along fantastically, and he's a fantastic guitar player, you know, and Dangerous New Machine's a great project. It's a great band. It was kind of cool. I don't know if it was part, you know, solidarity kind of thing, or what, but we had a great turnout that night as well. So it's interesting. We're kind of in that same boat of, we both Sean and I had other projects that we weren't really servicing, that kind of this approach to writing was probably better suited for. And certainly, I don't know many musicians who got into writing records, you know, and like, that's always the dream, right? When you're a kid, it's like, I just want to make records. And then here we are, you know, making records in different aspects, but we don't get to perform our own music. And really, you know, that's what we are, is we're performers. You know, I can't imagine a time when I didn't perform. I've always performed ever since I was wee tiny. And even before the Fozzy thing, I would do very dangerous stuff. Like, I would write music and then I would just go play it. No record. You know, the idea of you need a record to go play new music, that's really, when you're out in the world and you don't have a record deal or whatever, you just write music and you just play it. And here we were touring the world and doing all of this stuff and making these records with these other projects that we were really happy to be a part of. But I think that thing that makes you, the thing that in your belly, that fire in your belly, like, this is what I want to do. Like, I wrote this, this is me. It's not that Fozzy wasn't me or Stuck Mojo wasn't me, because they certainly, pieces of that were me. And certainly I'm sure Sean would say the same thing, that pieces of that were him too. But when I go, like, if you were just to ask me, all right, I'm going to lock you in a room for 2 days, just write me something that says, is close to exactly what you are. Like, I would probably write a thing closer to what Wormwood sounds like, or closer to what Epiphany sounds like, or closer to what Misunderstood or Tornado Dream sounds like. That's probably what I would do, because that's closer to who I am. And if you think about any of those things, except, it's easier to imagine Wormwood on a Fozzy record because that's exactly where everybody was introduced to it. But any of the rest of those things being on a Fozzy record, I don't see it. It's just weird. Like, that's just not where it belongs.
Right. And you just mentioned Misunderstood, and Agent Cooper just released, well, I should say you recently released a few more tracks, an EP called From the Ashes. Originally you released 3 songs on it, and then I think you came back and added 3 more. But From the Ashes is an EP by Agent Cooper. Fantastic music. You've been hearing it on Better Be Sharp for the last few days. And you guys are, from what I understand, you've already tracked, mixed, and mastered the full-length album. And you recently went on tour with Tony McAlpine over in Europe to promote this thing. So tell us a little bit about that tour, and tell us when can we expect this album?
Here's as much information as I can give about the album. It kind of started as a process of getting us from Chasing the Grail to Agent Cooper as a full-time touring project. So my proposal to Agent Cooper was, well, look, they had the first 2 records out on Prog Rock Records, which is an indie label. And it's a good label. But they didn't need to deliver the next record to them. It's pretty much they could do it and they could license it to them, or they could license it to anybody they wanted to. So my recommendation was, well, look, I'm not doing the Fozzy thing anymore, but Sean's going to keep doing it. So we can't just get up and go tour, to break a band like we kind of need to. So let's just take this in bites. Let's get this band up on its legs, because we're clearly making some changes. Let's do a series of EPs, and then we'll do shows around those EPs when Sean is in town, and just grow this thing to get some traction, see what we can do with our fan base quickly. Basically, the idea I wanted to do was record 3 songs, and then for the next 3 months, release a song while we're writing the next 3 songs or producing the next 3 songs. And they kind of started out of songs that were originally not Agent Cooper songs. They were Salem Ash songs. That's how we came up with the whole From the Ashes thing. We're being kind of cheeky. So that was kind of the process. We did those first 3 songs, which were Tornado Dreams, The Stand, and Mother. And all of those were Salem Ash tunes originally, just completely repurposed. And Mother is fairly close to what it was. Like, Salem Ash had actually produced that, and it went out on the one record that they had put out on Isabella Records years and years ago. So it got some sprucing up with some keyboard bits, and I rewrote the guitar solo, and a couple of little parts, but really as it is from start to finish, that is as that song, as I have known that song. That song's been around a long time. I remember hearing that when I first heard the band back in 1992. That's how long that song has been around. So it was really cool to kind of give it a new paint job and all that stuff. The Stand and Tornado Dreams are very different. Well, Tornado Dreams isn't very different. It's pretty much as it was written. They just never got a good recording of it at the time because it's a hard piece of music. The only thing that I did is that fugue in the middle of it. They had originally had this, it was a breakdown, and it was about the same number of measures that they had a breakdown, and it was contrapuntal, to where they had, it wasn't imitation, but different instruments would come in with their own parts that repeated and they would overlap. So there was this sort of contrapuntal nature to it, but it wasn't imitation in the sense of strict counterpoint like a Bach fugue. So I said, hey guys, I know we've got this thing. We can do that, but it's not good counterpoint. It's good music, but it's not good counterpoint. If you're open to it, let me rewrite something and let me write a fugue, because this is kind of what I do. I'm good at doing the math on all that stuff, but you have to write the whole thing out, very rock and roll to sit and write a fugue out. So I did that. That was my contribution to that. And then the stand got pretty much completely redone, and there were probably 4 different versions of it before we got to the version that's on the album. I remember one that almost made it, that we got pretty far along with. It was so radically different. It was like Agent Cooper meets Pat Metheny group. It was very interesting. It's like in my head, somewhere in there, my relationship with Eric Frampton is kind of like Pat Metheny and Lyle Mays. Like, he's the other half of that equation for me. So I started working on the tune in that respect, but that was also not the right vehicle. Like, that happening in Agent Cooper isn't the right answer either. So we kind of checked swing on that. Came up with some really cool ideas that are definitely getting repurposed for some other places. But obviously we didn't go that way with the stand. But we did end up going. It's interesting. You go through a process like that and you end up where you end up. So again, I'm getting long-winded. That EP was finished. We did a handful of shows. We started talking about the way to release an album with Binary Universal. So we started the legwork on that, and through that relationship, excuse me, that's when we started talking about that tour with Tony McAlpine. It was going to be for his first tour in a long time. He had just put out his record on Favored Nations. They thought it was a good match, since I had a record out on Favored Nations, that it would be an interesting, cross-pollination of guitar promotion, what have you. So we were already kind of in the process of working on the next 3 songs have been slated for my brilliant idea of let's do series of EPs. So we got the next 3 done and packaged them together with the first 3. So we had something to sell, because you got to promote something on tour. And on a tour like that, when you're not the headliner, you gotta fund it somehow. You got to be out promoting something. So having an EP to promote, to sell on the merch stand was paramount. It was just so important, having reviews, because getting people to come to the concert hall to review the band is one thing, but then having physical product out there that you can send your reviewers to get written reviews, to get in the magazines and the webzines and all that stuff. All of that stuff kind of combined helps really promote the engine of a tour. All of it gets people to the concert hall, and the concert hall reviews lead to more people coming to the concert hall, leads to more people buying the album, so on and so forth. So it's this machine that ends up feeding itself, hopefully. So at the end of that tour, my thought had always been, we'll do a series of EPs until we can find a label to land on, and then we'll follow all, because we were giving the initial EP, we gave it away. Those first 3 songs, just gave it away. The idea was, let's just keep giving, because nobody's buying recorded music. So we're just trying to get some traction. Let's get some press. Radiohead's already done it better. Everybody's already done this better. But so what? Let's just give the music away, and we'll keep giving it away until we get 3 EPs done. And at the end of it, everybody will be like, all right, guys, you've pretty much given away an album. Why did you do that? My thinking is that behind all of that, we would be writing a full album, and that we could say, well, because now we have this album. And through all of that process would be the setup for the release of a completely separate album of all new material that nobody had heard before. And through that process, we would have had the time to, experiment with our writing, because we were repurposing old Salem Ash stuff, which was already written. And most of it was written between Doug, Sean, and his brother Corey. And then other stuff like Misunderstood was written by Doug. It's a Doug song. I Can was an old Salem Ash tune. Power is a Doug song. Like, all of that stuff was really Doug is really kind of the centerpiece songwriter for Agent Cooper. And bringing in a writer like me was going to take a process. And anytime you're negotiating and writing with other musicians, that's a process. Because I'm kind of used to writing on my own and finishing a thought. And Doug is kind of used to doing that and sending it back to the band and letting everybody hack it to bits. I can't really do that. I can't write a song and hand it back to a band and say, all right, guys, hack it to bits. If I'm left to finish a thought, that's kind of what I'm trained to do. I finish a thought and tell everybody what to play. You know, I may leave spots for people to be interpretive or write a solo or see what kind of thoughts they may have to throw on top of something. But to have somebody come in and go, I think you need to chop that section in half. I can't really do that. Once I'm that far in the thought and I've dotted all those I's and crossed all those T's, I can't really have that conversation. And then that's just part of me, just being me. So I knew that there needed to be a process that we should go through as writers before we really got into a brand new album of the brand new lineup of Agent Cooper with all of these different writers brought to the fore. And this whole From the Ashes process was a good way to flesh that out. So everything moved a little faster than I initially wanted. We did the first EP. We got attention with the Binary Universal thing, and then quickly got the 6-song EP ready to go to market. So there was some different thoughts about how do we proceed from here, because now we have this EP signed, we've got this tour. Now what do? Do we go home and we jump right into the full album, or what are we going to do? And it was decided by the end of that tour that we were going to take this 6-song EP that we kind of rushed to get out to promote on this tour. And we like the music a lot, and it didn't really get the proper release that it should have had. So we are basically, this album that we're releasing now is the completion of this album. So it's basically all of the thought that I had of working in chunks of EPs is now brought to completion. So that's what's coming to market, and we are as quickly as possible going to see what we can do with another full record of brand new material. And there's tons of material we've been kicking around. But the idea was to, capitalize on this and these particular songs and move it out. And I was a little hesitant to do that at first, but lots of bands have been doing this stuff. I don't know if you've been keeping up with Corey Lowry, who is also Stuck Mojo alumni. He's got a band called I Empire, and they're fantastic. You should totally check them out. And they have, through a process of the last few years, just been writing songs, and they've released stuff into the album that they've ultimately released. And what they did was really cool, because they've been building their fan base as they go. This final release has alternate versions of, there's acoustic versions of songs that are on the full album and all that stuff. It's really kind of cool what they did. So it's cool if you've been keeping up as a fan to kind of see where everything's evolved, because things are kind of fun. The full album, back from mastering, the track listing, and some of the fun stuff that we did to with the album sequencing and some stuff like that. There's some nice surprises on there. I think it holds up as an album, even though it was not initially designed as an album, but it did take us a minute. Clearly we were thinking when we got home from tour back in March that we were going to finish this out to an album, and we're just now getting it back from mastering. It took a minute for us to figure out how do we get this done and how do we make it sound like an album. And it was worth taking the time to do that. Again, life is what happens while you're busy making plans. We had a bunch of ideas of how we wanted things to go, and we ended up with them going exactly like they did. So I do not have a release date because, literally, I just got back from mastering a week ago. So, we've all been listening to the masters and scrutinizing over every little detail and approving it. So we're all signing off on the masters now, and we're figuring out how to deal with the release. So there's some of that fun stuff going on there. And in the process of that, the conversation that I've had with the rest of the guys in the band is, pretty much from here, we've got the next round of touring that we're hoping to do, because we've got a tour. We've been off the road for too long now. Once the album drops, we got to get back out there. So that's going to happen. Some U.S. dates are going to happen. When and where, I do not have the firm answers. All of that's kind of tied into, how are we releasing the album? What's the marketing plan? Blah, 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 blah. There was some talk of some European dates as well. I think one of the tours that we were looking at is not going to happen, and that happens. Usually you look at all of the tours that are getting lined up and you go, well, these three are good possibilities. So you start going after them, and as different bands are doing their tour budgets and promoters decide whether, they're backing a tour or they're not. Some tours get into the planning phase and at the last minute they don't end up happening. So we had one that we were looking at. That one's not happening, unfortunately. But there's a couple others that we're still looking at that maybe weren't as obvious a shot for us to do, but they're still on the docket. So we're looking at those. And in the process of that is just writing. Like, I'm immediately going to work on my next solo record. That was kind of my plan. Really, when I started working on Wormwood, it was kind of the talk of Agent Cooper, but I didn't know how much work we were going to get done because of Sean, still doing all the touring for the album cycle for Chasing the Grail. My plan was, especially after I got the Favored Nations deal, was to work on my next record. Like, you can see I've got some funny promotion out of me riding around my yard on a tractor with my 7-string.
Right.
To promote that my album was going to be done in 2011. And here we are, almost the end of 2012, and it's barely out of the demo phase. And part of that is we started moving with the Agent Cooper stuff. It seemed like that was the best place to throw my efforts first. And now that this is done, now I can kind of clear my head and just kind of go into, all right, I have created enough room for all of the other instruments, including the lead vocals, around the guitars. Now let's just be completely gluttonous and let's just serve up the guitar, on the biggest platter I can possibly dream up with the brightest, boldest colors I can paint with. It doesn't need to be like anybody else's guitar record, but it does just need to be just so guitar. It's like Agent Cooper is unashamedly, it's a guitar band, and obviously Fozzy is an unashamed guitar band. And 2 of 5 is an interesting record. It is unashamedly a guitar record, but it's a very written and orchestrated record, which this record is going to be as well. But there are pieces of it that I am specifically looking at it and just saying, I'm not apologizing. I'm about to play 1 metric blank ton of guitar. So I'm pretty excited about just that whole process of just being a monk and just doing nothing but playing guitar and not even thinking about vocals, not even thinking about a keyboard part, not even apologizing for, you couldn't hear your bass lick. I'm sorry. It's my opportunity to go, okay, I've compromised and I've done the whole, I play in a band with 5 other guys, so this is how that works. And when I come home for the next 6 weeks, the only guy I have to please is me. Like, am I giggling? Cool. Then it's staying on the record. Does this make the hair on my arm stand up? Cool. Then that's happening. It's because sometimes when you're working with other writers, and they all know, because they all know the frustrations of just dealing with an obsessive compulsive guy like me. I frustrate everybody. But I'll get excited about something and somebody else will go, nah, not so much. And you're like, wow, I'm really excited about this. And then you have, somebody else vetoing something that you're very excited about. So on the one hand, there's lots of stuff where you go, wow, I really wanted to see this make the light of day in this song, in this band, in this particular presentation. But then on the other hand, knowing that I have this other outlet for my music, it's not like anything is ever just said no to. It's like if somebody doesn't like something, I kind of still have that, oh, okay, I've got a place for that. It's like I've had plenty of things that I offered up for the Agent Cooper stuff where it's swing and a miss, swing and a miss, swing and a miss. And every one of those things are really good ideas, and they've all just ended up off on the shelf of things that are going to end up on either my next record or my next record, or possibly the next Agent Cooper records. Like, everything gets repurposed. Like, there's not a theme that I've written that won't get used someplace, somewhere, sometime.
And as far as your next record goes, how far along are you with that as far as like the just the songwriting itself?
The songwriting is ongoing. It's kind of the thing, like with me, I've always been a writer. Ever since I was a kid, I always liked writing themes. So I've got so much on my audio drive of just little bits of demos and snippets of stuff. Lately, since I've been an iPhone user, there's this really cool voice recorder thing that, a lot of times you just need to record an idea. And when I was younger, I didn't have ways of recording my ideas, so I would just memorize them or I would write them down. So I have stacks of notebooks and folders full of themes that are written out. Some are orchestrated, some are not orchestrated, some are just verbalized. Like, some are kind of very sketchy where notes aren't even specific, but I can just see the gesture of the musicality on the page. And then there's just stuff that I've whistled into my iPhone. I used to, before I had an iPhone, I would call myself and leave myself a voice message while I was driving and sing an idea into my voicemail. So I've got all of that crap. It's funny. I mean, it just by any means necessary. When you have an idea, you just got to get it out. So I have tons and tons of that stuff. So without getting into too much of what 205 was initially supposed to be, that record was initially supposed to be very different. And it became 205 largely because of I had this bold new audience and this opportunity being in Fozzy, where I needed to do a more aggressive kind of record. So the record went that way. But it was initially going to be a little bit more sequential and maybe not necessarily concept record, but kind of concept record, where there was definite themes, there were opening themes, things were going to tie in, and even if they didn't have themes that stayed together from song to song to song, but they definitely, even just by song title, kind of referenced each other. So I still have a lot of that stuff that didn't make it onto 205 that's getting pulled forward. So some of that is kind of like there's songs like Lavender, where I wrote that when I was 18 and never had a way to really get that out until I could write out the parts, but I didn't have a way for anybody else to hear it unless I hired, an ensemble to play all of those different parts. And, a lot of those orchestrated guitars were initially written out for this big string symphony and, all that stuff. So there's stuff like that that's still around that I've had forever that it's never had the light of day. And it's just kind of sitting. One thing that I've got there is this one longer piece that's called The Redemption of Purity and Innocence, which even just by the ostentatious nature of the title, like it's just taken me a long time to even just grapple with that, because I really kind of want to go into a thing where it's not just the song idea and the guitar idea for the sake of the guitar idea. I kind of need to go through this emotional process. And I did it with Wormwood, and we could probably do another whole podcast on what exactly I was thinking about emotionally and what was I really trying to express with Wormwood. I mean, there's the clever Dream Theater, Farewell to King's Rush kind of reference-y kind of things that I was trying to point to. But then there's also these it's about the Book of Revelations, and I grew up in the Catholic Church, so I may have some things that I was, personally getting at with that, and I know Chris is a Christian. I mean, this didn't just come from a place of, man, heavy metal is so cool, and the devil and the end of the world is just a really cool heavy metal thing to do. I'm sure there was a part of that Chris was thinking, but there's also a part where Chris is a Christian, and I'm sure he sat up with the Bible and really looked at the Book of Revelations and said, man, how do I deal with all of this stuff in just a lyric format? He would be really interesting. I don't think anybody's done like just a proper musician interview with him. Like, this is the tragedy of Chris Jericho. He gets tons of interviews, but he gets tons of interviews that are based on the cult of personality because he's Chris Jericho, the wrestler and the famous guy. But he's very creative, and that creative process, like, I didn't see all of the press that he did for Chasing the Grail because I kind of moved on to other things. But I think I would have watched an interview or read an interview with him of anybody that would have asked him very specific questions about lyrically, what were you getting at with this? Because this is an interesting subject matter. This is clearly coming from a Christian point of view. What are your thoughts, beliefs, dispositions, attitudes about all this stuff? I think that would be a fascinating interview with him as a guy, not as a famous guy, but as a guy. And I have the luxury of knowing Chris as a person. We know each other's families, so I have a bit more insight into what he was getting at with that stuff as well. So on a personal nature, we get to connect on some things, which is really cool. It's not just some song like that. So when I think of a tune like that, or Peace Be With You is another one of those songs where it's very much meditative. Like I'm really in the recording process, and every time I perform that, I'm really getting to an emotional place. I'm really kind of like a Stanislavski method actor, where I'm becoming something. And I don't always succeed at it because, it's a very, very hard thing to do. But I know some amazing actors who are trained in this stuff, and I've spent hours watching them work and talking with them about this process, and I'm really trying to adopt that as a performer. It's not enough just to go out and play something cool on the guitar. I need to become something. You know, when you go to see a play, or you go to the theater, or you go to see anything like that, when you watch a movie, there's already this, it's easier to suspend disbelief when you go to see a movie, because you can create something where people are already looking at the three walls, and you know, the fourth wall is easy for the actors to ignore in a way, because you're just ignoring the camera. But in the theater, that fourth wall that you're acting to, which is the audience, to be able to emote across that chasm, people who do that well, that is one of the most amazing skill sets to me out there. I mean, live music and live performance art is where it's at. As human beings, that's where it's at. I mean, when you're painting something, you put all of this emotional expression into the painting of something. I mean, you can think about a Jackson Pollack thing, which is just very visceral and throwing paint at the canvas. It's the emotional expression of the thing. I mean, when you just step back from it and you look at the thing and you're like, a guy flicked paint at a canvas. Like, what's the real art going on there? But at the time, it's revolutionary. And it was the act of creating the art itself that was the revolution. And the rest of it is intellectual. What does this mean? What does it become? What does it translate to? How does it make you feel? Art does this to us. When it's done well, it does that. And now you can see faux Jackson Pollack stuff at like Garden Ridge or Walmart or whatever. And of course, it doesn't have the same visceral attitude. And nobody will ever sell a painting for millions of dollars like Jackson Pollack, because it's not Jackson Pollack. He's the one guy that gets to do that. But there's that, when you're that kind of artist, it's whatever emotional place he was in when he created the art was real. And it exploded on the canvas, and that's it. And you buy that moment. He captured a moment in time, and you buy that, or you look at that. But forever and ever, that's it. It's just that moment in time. It's not like that painting actively does anything other than exist. So I know that's a little weird and intellectual and kind of philosophical, but that's kind of the thing. Like, when I write stuff, I kind of do that. Peace Be With You is very much like that. When I perform that, I become that. It very much is a meditation. It very much is a place that comes from an idea of prayer for me. And it's very moving. Like, I think about, you know, family members that I've lost and praying for them to, you know, to heal when they were sick. And like, I literally think about that stuff, and it hurts, and I play it, you know, and sometimes the music is terrible, but it's real, you know. And that's a simple enough tune where I could just play it. I don't have to do that to myself. I don't have to constantly torture myself and think about all these really, you know, difficult concepts and ideas and painful places. But, you know, equally, something like that, there's songs like Living the Good Life, where that came from a genuinely joyful place in my life. And to play a song in the middle of all this other stuff, which is easier for me to do the moody stuff than it is to do the joyful stuff, and to just think of moments of joy in my life, thinking about, you know, meeting my newborn nieces and nephews for the first time, you know, and feeling that overwhelming sense of love for new family. And like, it's instantaneous, you know, that's a joy that I don't have words for. I absolutely, without fail, do not have words for that. And that's why I write instrumental music, because I'm trying to express something that I lack the witness of language and vernacular to be able to accurately make somebody understand the feeling that I have in my heart or in my spirit about something. So there's a lot of stuff like that. And I mentioned the one song, the redemption of purity and innocence. It's been around for a long time. It's not a new thing. Like, sketches of it have existed for probably 10 years now. So but for me to finish it now is, of course, going to have, you know, all of the experience of the last 10 years thrown at it as well. It's going to be a big piece. I don't know if it's going to be, you know, 10 minutes. I don't know if it's going to be big in the sense of that. It may be so overwhelming that I don't get it done for this record, but I kind of have to work my way through it. So anyway, I could probably talk my way around Sunday to get to answer your very simple question. I have a lot of writing, but it needs refining, and it needs to be massaged and completed, and some details, just done up on it. Some stuff needs to be peeled back like an onion to get to the essence of, I threw a bunch of stuff at this like Jackson Pollack. Now let me kind of get to the heart of it and find the Picasso that might be under there, or the Van Gogh, or the Renoir, or whatever. So there's lots of stuff like that. And then there's other things where I don't typically, I'm not a songwriter. I am I am a songwriter. It's probably the wrong way to say it, but I really work more as a composer. I write themes. I'm constantly writing little themes, and I get excited about them. I don't know if you ever have seen that movie, Immortal Beloved, which is the movie about Beethoven.
No, I haven't.
That Gary Oldman portrayed Beethoven in. And in the end of his life, he portrays Beethoven as just running around, just humming that na 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 na, na theme, the Ode to Joy theme from his Final Symphony. I don't do that, but I get a theme in my head, and I can't stop it. And that's kind of how I know a theme is written, because I as a jazz musician, or I can't even call myself a jazz musician, because that's really not doing jazz a good service, because I don't think jazz wants to identify with me. I want to identify with it. But I'm an improviser. And as an improviser, I am constantly playing with themes in my head. And my wife laughs at me because we have cats. And I just make up songs for all the cats, and they all have their own songs. It's like a constant Broadway musical production around the house, because the cats are hanging around doing their thing, and I just come in the room and suddenly catch them up, and we just break into a musical. It's kind of funny. And I just do it partly because there's something wrong with me. But it's also a really good exercise from my improvisational sensibility, that I'm constantly flexing that comedic, melodic, thematic part of my creativity. It just never stops. So for me to whip out my iPhone and sing a theme into it, you'll find me at a traffic light doing that very thing, or just running around the house singing stupid songs to my cats, or, to my, I find myself, the older I get, the worse it's getting too, because I'll be at a friend's house and they have a dog, and I'll be just petting with the dog, and I like animals. And then all of a sudden, just kind of one-on-one with the dog, I start making up a song for the dog. And my friends are looking at me like, what the hell is wrong with this guy? Should we call somebody? Is he on his meds? I'm kind of weird. I'm kind of really, and people just kind of accept it at this point.
There's nothing wrong with that.
I find that I probably entertain my nieces and nephews the most. When they were younger, they just got the biggest kick out of their crazy Uncle Mike, because we'd just be driving down the road, and I'd be making up a song, and my youngest niece, Sophie, she does it now, and she's good at it, and it's ridiculous. She's so funny. She's one of the most creative human beings I've ever met. She's just amazing. And she'll just crack me up, because we'll be riding around someplace and she'll just start making up some song, and it's awesome. And it's funny. And it's her. It's so her. And now that my oldest niece, Tiffany, is a bit older, if she catches me doing it, I get the whole teenage, she looks at me, come on, Uncle Mike, you're embarrassing me. Yeah. It's there's a point in life where, and some of that is that redemption of purity and innocence concept. It's there's a time where you can just do something because it just, it just bubbles out of you. It's just joyful, and it's expressive, and you got to deal with it. And when we're young, we don't know that you shouldn't do that until somebody says, hey man, you probably shouldn't just run around singing songs like that. You're kind of making an ass of yourself. Somebody comes along that we look up to, and they tell us, hey, you really need to stifle your creativity. Life is not as beautiful as that. You can't do that. You need to act right. You need to act your age. You need to grow up. You need to do this. And I think it's one of the worst things that we do, or society does, to children. And I don't believe in infantiling children. I don't believe in doing that. I don't believe we should keep people juvenile or anything. But it's a very delicate line to do as people and as a society, to, one, foster responsibility and personal responsibility, and just pride in your work ethic, and honesty, and just being a good person. All of that stuff that you may associate with growing up and being an adult. How do you do that? And in the same gesture, the same sentence, encourage to dream as big as you can, and don't let anybody ever tell you that you can't have that dream. How do you give somebody, how do you, one, encourage them to grow up without stepping on their dreams, or encourage them to dream without ruining them from being a responsible, productive adult in society. I think we all kind of grapple on it, whether we actually have children of our own or, as an artist, I think about this because all kinds of people come to me, whether it's because they like 7-string guitar and they want to hear me make whale noises. I have an opportunity with every concert I do, every interview or whatever. It's like, no matter how small, 2 people may hear this and they may be greatly influenced by what I say, whether I completely turn them on to an idea or completely turn them off to an idea, either because they think I'm great or they think I'm an asshole. I still have an enormous responsibility in this, that somebody's hearing me and I'm projecting something out into the world. I need to be responsible with that. Just going to the grocery store, you have that. Just driving down the road, we have that. It doesn't matter that the windows are up and the air conditioning's on and I'm not talking to the guy in the car next to me. I still should probably be a good driver because, 1, I don't want to wreck my car, and 2, he would probably appreciate it and his kids would probably appreciate it if I don't run my car into his car. That's when you think about that stuff with all intention. There was this great book that an actor lent to me years ago called Meaningful Mindfulness, and it was written by a Vietnamese Buddhist monk. And it's all about the intentionality, the putting meaning and being mindful into absolutely every single thing that you do. It's one of the most painful experiences trying to do that accurately. I'm not good at it. And I don't know many people that are good at it. I mean, you would have to be some kind of a Zen Buddhist master to be good at it. And probably a Zen Buddhist master would tell you they're not good at it. They just keep working at it every day. But that idea of just try it as an experiment. Anybody listening to this, just try it. It's just as simple as absolutely having a thought and doing everything with intention. It's as simple as when you wake up in the morning, the first thought you should have is, I am coming awake. I am breathing in. I am breathing out. And everything comes back to the very basics of the physicality of existence, how you are, what you are and what you're becoming. Every next thought, I am sitting up. I am breathing in. I am breathing out. I am putting my feet over the side of the bed. I am breathing in. I am breathing out. I am putting my foot on the floor. I am breathing in. You start just in your mind cataloging. And for somebody who's obsessive compulsive like me, I count my steps when I walk anyway. So for me, it was easy to start doing this stuff, but really difficult in just the enormity of the amounts of things that we do that we take for granted. But it's really good, and I still do this at times where I feel cluttered in my mind and I feel cluttered in my life, and I'm about to go through it again to start working on this record because I kind of need to just push the extraneous to the side for a moment, just for a few weeks, so where I can work on some details to where I can just really zero in on it. But try that. Just getting in the car. Think about every single little thing that you do. If you're listening to the radio, think about all the stuff that you're paying attention to there while you're driving, looking at your mirrors, turning on your blinkers, hopefully using your blinkers, because damn it, people, if you drive a car and you do not use your turn signals, I have an axe to grind with you, because that's a pet peeve, man. Use your turn signals, people. This is public service announcement, and I approve this message. That's the thing with me. You got to use turn signals. But that mindfulness of I want people around me to know I'm going to take a left-hand turn. I'm not just stopping for no reason. Because if I see you step on your brakes, there could be a problem. There could be an accident. There could be something on the road. I don't know. But all of a sudden, it could be an emergency. But if I see a turn signal, I'm like, oh, okay, it's just going to turn. No need to panic. Crisis mode averted. It's just, if you can walk around that way and just be mindful and self-aware, it's a laborious process. It will tax you mentally to think about that stuff.
I do the same thing with the turn signals. I can't stand it when someone doesn't do that, but that's what you were saying. It's part of being a responsible human being and letting people know that you are safe and that all you want to do is get over there.
Yeah, just that simple. Or, hey, I'm at the grocery store. I'm going to wait in line. Or, hey, there's the grocery store. All the lines are really long, and I'm in a hurry. Do I rush up into this line to cut in front of one more person, or do I just get there when I get there? It's like you kind of have a decision to make at that moment. And there are some people who will make the choice just like, I don't have time for this. I got to be one more person in front. Or you just go, man, this is just going to take some time. Nothing I can do about it. I'll get to my next thing when I get to my next thing, and just have a little bit of peace. Sometimes we have to remind ourselves to be like water and just flow, with everything that's going on around us.
Well, this interview has taken a very zen turn, but that's fine. Getting a little bit closer back to music, back in August, you were actually billed for Steve Vai's after show at the Vinyl and ended up performing a last-minute acoustic set for him to open up. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's funny. I've only met Steve on a handful of occasions. Once as a fan at a meet and greet thing, and a couple of times since then as an artist. He's a personality, man. Like when you meet him and he's pressed in the flesh at a meet and greet thing, I mean, he's a rock star. There is no doubt about it. He has enough personality to fill up a really big room. He's a big personality, and you are immediately struck with that when you're around him. And when I got to meet him and actually have a very personal conversation, it was in a hotel room after he had watched me perform, after he had signed me to Digital Nations. That was an intense way to meet him for the second time. And even though he wasn't necessarily quote unquote on, because it was a meet and greet and he, needed to put the personality out there. I mean, you're sitting in a hotel room with the guy and you're looking at him and like, I know exactly what he looks like because I've been following his career since I was a kid, and he knows very little about me. So I have all of the advantage of knowing the cult of personality of an individual who's sitting in front of me and know nothing about him personally. Nothing. Not at all. Because as an individual, I've never met the guy. This is my first time meeting him as an individual. So trying to put aside whatever mythology I've cooked up in my head or I've, been marketed to my brain, and very, very painstakingly marketed to guys like me, to actually having a conversation about, simple things like, hey man, you were doing this thing. Like he asked me about some things like, they said, what pedal were you using for this? And, it's kind of surreal. Steve Vai is going to ask me, what pedal am I using? That's one of those little moments in time where, I can probably replay that conversation in my mind, like a DVD, and probably will be able to for the rest of my life. Because it was that meaningful and it was that cool and that just humbling. Just what a great experience, and what an interesting guy Steve is, and what a very philosophical and again, I think he's a very mindful guy. And at the same time, he's very business minded. It's not like he's fluffy, like he's just going to talk all about, Vietnamese Buddhist monks, with you. When you're talking about business and you're on his label and you're talking about business stuff, it's about business, and he doesn't need to be your friend at that particular point. You're in business together on something. And, that's a big thing to respect with him, that he knows exactly where the line is and how to be all about business to where, he doesn't have to be cuddly. You don't have to want to give him a hug. You need to respect him because you're doing business together. And I do respect him tremendously for that. So I mentioned that because in that conversation, we were talking about this new Digital Nations thing and what he's trying to do with the label and the state of the music industry as it is, and what's going on with physical distribution and what's happening to just monetizing music, because it's shrinking. We're all dealing with this. Everybody's dealing with this. And you hear a lot of arguments out there. People want to cry about, man, it's not cool. The internet, it's people stealing our music, and that's why we can't make any money. And I find that the people that are crying the loudest about that are people who have no careers. They don't have any fans, and they would probably be blessed if people like their music enough to steal it. People are not stealing their music, and they think they're missing out on record sales. They're not missing out on shit. They're deluding themselves, and they're just wanting to speak very loudly about why their career isn't going very well. That's the honest to God truth. I know too many people and have read too many blogs about people who want to be on the scene in the music business, and as close as they can get is just being a mouthpiece for complaining about the music business rather than creating art and getting out there and put your ass on the line and put your money where your mouth is and see if you can get people to give a shit. Because the music business is capitalism, pure and simple. You create something, there is absolutely no demand for your art. You create every bit of demand for your art. It's not like you invent the microwave oven and suddenly every kitchen needs to be equipped with a microwave oven. Now, I can see that invention becoming commonplace. Do you need one? Not necessarily, but I can see why people would want to have that in their life. A band, a songwriter, a singer, some self-important douche with a guitar, there's no demand for what you do. You know, start at home. Does your mom like what you do? That's a good place to start. How about your brothers and sisters? How about your friends at school? How about, you know, the colleagues around you? How about your town? How about, can you draw 200 people in the town that you live in to come see your shitty band? You know, maybe you are pretty good, but maybe you're a shitty marketer and you can't get people to come see your band. It's like, you know, at some point, be a little more involved and responsible. Take personal responsibility for how your career is going. And it's another PSA from Mike Martin. But Steve and I were talking about this very frankly, just like that. And Steve is the person to talk to about this stuff for a number of reasons. One, he worked with Frank Zappa very early on in his career, and Frank is or was the independent musician. Frank did so much on his own. Study Frank Zappa. I don't care if you don't like his music, you think he was weird, and you sang songs about yellow snow and whatever. It doesn't matter. If you can't get into Frank that way, read books about the man because he was a brilliant, brilliant man. Philosophically, business-wise, compositionally, just a brilliant, brilliant man. Like, if there's one person, if everybody asks that question, who would you like to have lunch with? I'd like to have lunch with Frank Zappa. I really wish that I could have met him in my lifetime, because I look up to him so much in so many ways. And Steve has a lot of that wisdom. You know, part of the reason Steve Vai is who he is and is in the position that he is in is because the independently minded Frank Zappa gave him some great advice. And that led Steve to put out a record independently like Flexible. And even though he probably hasn't sold as many copies of Flexible as he did of Passion and Warfare, he owns 100% of Flexible. So he doesn't have to sell as many copies of Flexible to make as much money as he did on Passion and Warfare. You know what I mean? So it's like, he's very smart. And creating Favored Nations was a part of that. And this whole Digital Nations revolution thing that he wanted to get involved in. And if you look, his new record, it's not on Sony. It's on Favored Nations now. He is completely independent now. He is one of the biggest independent artists out there. He knows what he's doing. He knows his market, and he knows how to get after it. So having this conversation with him was not lost on me. I mean, it had gravity with me. And some of the stuff that we talked about at the time was, as I said, Steve, I'm going to be completely frank with you, and I'm not just saying this because every guitar player is going to say it, but when you do your next record, I need to open for you. I have to open for you. And he's like, well, I'm very hard to open for, and I don't usually do that kind of thing. I like to get different types of artists because, you know, I like different things, and it's hard. Like, you can do what you do, and my audience may not care about it. You know, they may not like it because they're there to see, you know, the Steve show. You know, I'm paraphrasing, but basically the sentiment is he's a very hard artist to open for. And I recanted the story of Fozzy opening up for Motorhead on their 30th anniversary tour in LA. And you can't open up for Motorhead? Shit. Motorhead's one of those bands that people go to see Motorhead and they don't give a shit who you are. You can light yourself on fire. And then just wait for somebody to put your ass out so that Motorhead can go ahead and come out. Like, that's opening up for Motorhead. And that's exactly what it was like. We were breaking our necks opening for that Motorhead audience. And Ronnie James Dio was in the audience. I mean, this was a big gig for me, man. I was very excited to be at this show. And we finished one song, big Fozzy outro, bam! A couple people clapping. Somebody yells out, "You suck!" And Sean and I just looked at each other like, I wasn't upset. It was awesome. Because if the show is not going to go well, that's exactly how you want it to go. It's kind of like that thing in wrestling where if you're a bad guy or a good guy, you either want everybody cheering you or booing you. But you don't want people apathetic. Because if people don't care, you're not doing your job. So I would rather in that circumstance have people yelling at us that we suck. So it was kind of awesome to play in front of Ronnie James Dio in LA, my first time playing a gig in LA, and it's for a Motorhead gig in the 30th anniversary tour, and I'm being told that I suck. It was awesome. So I told Steve that story. I'm like, I lived through that. I'm sure I can live through your audience, man. I'm like, but Motorhead was not our audience. You have the guitar market. I need your audience. You know, if I can't win over a percentage of your audience, I may want to rethink some things. You know, I know the risk I'm taking of people just going, this guy's awful, you know, but I would rather do it and have his market say, this guy's terrible. Get him out of here. And then I can know. For the rest of my life, I can know, man, I threw the Hail Mary pass. I did the best show I could in front of Steve Vai's audience, and I suck. I need to go do other things. I would rather know that rather than feel like I have something to offer and not taking the opportunity to do it. And he said, well, you got a point about that. And he told me a story about opening, or not opening, but playing for Alcatraz. The first gig he did with Alcatraz, Yngwie Malmsteen was the guitar player for Alcatraz, right, and very famous for being that guy. He had just left the band. Nobody knew. So they were playing a gig, and in front of all of the amplifiers were very rabid Yngwie Malmsteen fans, expecting this giant 6-foot-tall Swedish guy to come out and melt their faces. And he came out wearing green pants or something. You know, nobody knew. And they all kind of looked at him, and they weren't really happy that Yngwie wasn't there. He's like, I couldn't really do anything right, but I didn't really do anything wrong because nobody left. And that's the point. It's like, no matter what you do, nobody leaves. So he said, yeah, I know what you're saying. You're right about that. He's like, I don't know, man. You know, we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. He wasn't promising me anything. And he's right to not promise that kind of thing because he knows every guitar player on the planet. You know, I'm just another guitar player begging him to open up for him. How many other thousands of guitar players send an email asking the exact same thing? The only leg that I had to stand on is that I'm now on his label. So as a business model, this is an opportunity to break a guitar player and very selfishly make money off the sale of his albums. That seems like a good reason to do that. And the answer that he had is Rob Balducci was there in the room with us, and Rob is on Favored Nations as well. And Rob is a fantastic guitar player and a very good friend of mine. The conversation immediately moved to, you guys need to tour together. He said, you guys are both great. You don't do the same thing, but you're great guitar players. You guys need to do the thing. It's not that, you know, you need to wait for the G3 tour to pick up one of you guys. It's that you guys just need to become the next thing. Go do that thing. So Rob and I have been talking about that off and on for a couple of years now, and now we're both managed by the same guy, the Lowry Agency. So that will help that process immensely as we continue to move forward. But then flash forward to today, when the tour was announced for Steve and his record was coming out on Favored Nations, I called the label immediately and said, hey, he's got an Atlanta date. I know I can't afford to go out and do the entire U.S. run. I can't be that opening artist. But I could probably do some dates in the Southeast, and I may be worth some marketability in the Southeast because I'm the guy in the Southeast that's on your label, you know, and presented them an idea of maybe you should have lots of different guys. Like there's a guy in Florida, Tony Smotherman, and there's Rob in New York, and, you know, there's Andy Eldort up in New England. It's like there's different guys that are on the label that could open for you in different markets where you could be breaking the entire catalog of Favored Nations to your label was kind of my idea. But, you know, as with most things, by the time the tour is announced, all of the business dealings are done. It's kind of like you need to have insight well ahead of the curve because by the time you've heard of something, all the decisions are made. And at that point, Beverly McClellan, she was opening up for the tour doing acoustic guitar and singing, and she's a fantastic singer. And she's singing on Steve's new record. So all of that stuff was long since done. It was a great way to have her sing in Steve's band and promote a new song from his new record, and have something very different open up for him, which Steve likes to do. He likes to have very different kind of artists open for him. So I was a little dejected about that. But this particular venue that he was playing in Atlanta is a complex that has 3 venues in it: Center Stage, Vinyl, and the Loft. And I know the promoter of the venue because I've worked out of there. I've played there a bunch of times. So I called him up. I said, hey, man, would you be interested in doing an after show? Have you got anything booked at this other particular room that shares the same hallway? He's like, no, I got nothing that night. I said, well, let me see if I can get the label to promote this as an after show, because it's about time for me to do a gig anyway. And this is the way to where even if I can't play in front of Vi's audience, I can at least promote the show, and everybody that will be at the show will at least see the promotion for me. So for me, it's a win-win. Even if I don't fill up a room full of guys, at least everybody knows my name and I'm on Vi's record labels. You know, theoretically shooting fish in a barrel. So did that. The label thought it was a great idea. Steve thought it was a great idea. Get the green light, the blessing, the whole 9 yards, and proceeded to go about setting up for that. The day that I got there, got to the loading dock, I'm loading in. Vi's crew is outside, and they're like, hey, you with the Mike Martin band? I'm like, yeah, I'm Mike. And they're like, dude, they're like, we're seeing promotion all over the town for your show, and you're on Vi's. It's like, good on you, man. They're like, just very complimentary about everything they had seen, and I'm a hard, industrious worker. Like, if I'm going to do something, I'm going to do something. You're going to hear about it. So they were just commenting on it, how everybody in the band and everybody in the crew was very excited about the show, and there was, you know, some of the best local promotion for even just the Steve Vai show, because the best way to promote my show was to promote the Steve Vai show. You know, to have somebody who's vested in promoting locally for a show goes a long way. And I don't know if his show ultimately sold out, but he was close to selling out. He had a good capacity show in Atlanta. And Atlanta is not a guitar market, you know, so I can't take as much credit of that because I don't know how much I helped, but I don't think I hurt, you know, just being out there active in the guitar community promoting the Steve Vai show, because it very selfishly, you know, ended up promoting my show.
Like what you said before, as long as nobody leaves, it's good.
Yeah. So I'm loading in and I'm doing my thing, and somebody comes up. I can't remember if they were with the venue or if they were with Vi's crew, and they said, hey, man, Beverly's sick tonight, and Steve wants to know if you can open up. And, like, I'm loading in the band. I'm like, do you want my whole band to come down there? I'm like, there's not a lot of time for me to take all this gear down there and get it up here for my show. I'm like, I'll totally do it. Totally do it. Do it in a heartbeat. But just tell me if that's what you want me to do. And they're like, no, Steve really can't do that because he's set up for an acoustic opener. But you're welcome to come and do an acoustic set, or, you know, if you have any play-along tracks, if you want to do the music -1 kind of thing. And I have 205, you know, without all the lead guitar stuff on it for doing clinics and demonstration stuff. So, like, I always have that on my iPod. I'm like, well, I could do that, but I really don't like that idea. Like, I'd rather play with the band. You know, the tracks thing, you know, every other guitar player out there doing what I do is forced to play to tracks much more often than they want to. They want to play with a band. And that's been my sticking point. It's why I don't play more clinics and music store demonstration stuff, is I don't want to be known as a guy that plays to tracks. I want to be known as a guy like Vi or Eric Johnson or Pat Metheny or John Schofield or Mike Stern or Steve Vai, that I play with a band. And yeah, they do track stuff because you have to. It's just practical from time to time. You know, if the budget is to fly you to a trade show to demonstrate some new product and talk about it, you play along the tracks. It's just not feasible to bring your band for that. I get that. But there are some guys I know that they're doing all demonstration stuff, and they never get to do shows with their bands because now they're kind of known as demonstrators. So I really, really try not to do that, because I see that warning of once you're known for one thing, you know, that's it. Then you're breaking out of that thing. So I would rather move along more slowly and be known for being a guy that comes out with a band always, you know. So that's kind of what I've been doing. So I was lucky that a buddy of mine that I was having do an acoustic opening act for me, Brian Cameron, who's an amazing guitar player, singer-songwriter. He plays for a local Southern rock band called the Reluctant Saints. And you should totally check them out. If you like the Allman Brothers and Government Mule and Little Feat and all of that stuff, like, they are the band around Atlanta that does that stuff as a younger band. They're phenomenal. I can't say enough good things about them. They're dear, dear, dear friends of mine. And Brian was gracious enough to open up the set for me. He and I have done shows together for years and just longtime friends. Again, one of my favorite guitar players in town that I'm so fortunate to get to play with. And we're so different, but we just have a blast when we play together because we speak this weird guitar language together. So he was like, man, take my guitar, just go do it. Now, the downside for me is that Brian's a slide player, so his action's set up a little bit high, and he likes heavier strings because he's into more Southern rock. He's a very, muscular guitar player. Me, I'm a bit of a wuss. I play 7-string electric guitar. I don't play slide. I don't like low action. I like a little bit of a fight, but I use relatively light strings. I use light treble strings and heavier bass strings. And if you're a guitar player listening to this, I use on my 7-string 9-242 from high E to low E, and then I use a 54 as the low B. I like the heavier strings on the bass strings, partly because I like to dig in a little bit on rhythm stuff, and they tend to not go sharp when I'm playing a little bit hard. And if I play something like a Les Paul, or I have an Ibanez AS80, like double cutaway guitar, very Larry Colton looking thing, I use 10 through 52, so it's, again, a little bit heavier treble strings, but heavy bass strings, more like a jazz bass string set. And again, just because I like the rigidity of that, you can get on it pretty good, and it won't go sharp if you're picking a little hard, and just tuning stability and all that stuff. So I get why dudes use 13s. I'm just a little bit feeble, and I can't do some of the frilly, pretty stuff that I do on those types of strings. So basically, I had to get loaded in and decide to do this thing, and then figure out what the hell I was going to play. Because Steve was like, you got 20 to 25 minutes, just do your thing and promote your show, man. Just have at it, go nuts. And I'm a classically trained guitar player, so I play solo guitar, but I'm not prepared at all. Like, I have nothing prepared. So, I just accepted to do it, and then got my load in done, and then ran down there and had about 15 minutes sitting backstage, looking at, this very over-the-top stage scenario that Vi has on this particular tour with all these different lights all over the place. It's really cool. What the hell I'm going to play. So it was fun. I just tuned the guitar down a little bit low so I could deal with the heavier strings and that higher action. It was fun, man. I managed to eke together what I think was an entertaining 25 minutes worth of music. Everybody seemed to dig it. I got some good applause, I think, from the crowd. And more importantly, I got people to come to my show afterwards. And I think I got more people to come to my show directly because they actually got to see me and hear me play a little bit and hear versions of the stuff on 205 that was, kind of stripped down and solo acoustic like that. So it was good, man. It was the thrill of a lifetime to get to do it. I didn't get to see Steve. Funny enough, I didn't get to see Steve that day because by the time I was running down there to do my thing, he was already getting ready for his show stuff. But I got to say hi to his band, and it was cool when I was walking by one room, and Morgan Rose from Seven Dust was sitting in the room talking with Jeremy Colson, and they're apparently longtime friends. And I've known Morgan for years, just from Seven Dust being, amazing local hard rock band. I hadn't seen Morgan in a while. I think last time I saw Morgan was running around with Rich doing some Stuck Mojo thing. So that's going back a few years too. So it was just good to see Morgan and catch up for a minute and say hi to everybody else in the band. It was good, man. It was a really, really good time. And I don't get nervous about shows, but I think that whole, immediately get prepared to do something you're not prepared to do and get it done, that whole little opening slot thing for me. I usually like to sit and just look at people, and really soak in the moment. I love the moment, I'm not scared of the moment. I want to throw myself into the moment and just swim in it as long as I can. So it's kind of trying to do that, kind of trying to look at the Steve Vai set list and go, oh God, he's playing that tonight, and because I wanted to watch as much of Steve set as I could, but now my sound check had been put off now. So now I didn't get to see any of Steve's show, unfortunately. So it's trying to do that, trying to geek out, trying to just live in the moment and just soak it out, the whole thing in, but it all passes, in just the bat of an eye, it's over. But what was funny is I was so laid back after that, not like I was a bundle of nerves or anything, but there was so much intensity over. I had been getting ready for my after show and needing to be completely on point, that now I've put all of that energy into this 25-minute thing I wasn't expecting to do. So I was the coolest, most laid back guy. I was like, hey man, do you want to go over this part? I'm like, nah, you got it. Guys in the band were like, you want to run this at sound check at all? I'm like, nah, no, it's cool. It's like, what do you want me to play here? It's like, just whatever. And usually I'm pretty particular. I'm like, no, I want you to play these notes, and I want you to play them exactly in this order. I want you to put your left hand on the piano here, and I want you to do this with your right hand. I want this patch, I want this. But don't play it too loud. I want you, like I'm usually very specific about stuff, and now I was like, it's cool. Like, no matter what happens now, everything's gravy. It was really kind of surreal. It was a surreal night for me. I'll tell you, one of the coolest things for me, without giving away my age, shit, I'm not that old. I'm 38 now, but I moved to Atlanta in 1992. And it was in August of 1992. So to come around 20 years later, I've been in so many bands now and have done so many gigs on so many continents and plenty of headlining stuff where the band I'm in is on the marquee. I have never had my own marquee. And mine, just drive up to center stage, and the marquee for that night, almost 20 years to the day from when I moved to Atlanta, says Steve I, Mike Martin. Was one of the sweetest moments I've had in this career. It really was a personal, just like, I'll treasure it forever. There are lots of good days in this life, and there are lots of good days in this business. I mean, at the end of it, I play guitar for a living. It doesn't suck. Even if I don't make a ton of money, I absolutely, unashamedly love everything about what I do. I love it, love it, love it, love it, love it. And, I don't pursue that. People ask me, do you make a lot of money? No, I don't make money. I make music. And that's, you do something for the love of it, and you will always be successful. And it's kind of where I am in my whole life with everything. It's like I have a little thing in the world that I do. It seems to be continually growing, which I'm so eternally grateful for, just the opportunity to continue to work, to continue to, just sow seeds and try to reap them and see my harvest grow year after year. That's, even if it's not growth in dollar amounts, but it's growth in new fans and new friends and new contacts and new musicians that I know. And, it's just such a wonderful journey, this life. The music part is great, but it's really a life. And music keeps me connected to people in the world around me. And that makes it an interesting life, if that makes any sense. So, like, all of that, you kind of have to stop. There are some days you just kind of have to stop. And that was one day that I kind of stopped and was like, all right, things are going along. There's a plan, and I don't know what that plan is, but it's doing its thing. I'm on a path. Am I on the right path? I don't know. But this is a pretty good indication that I at least like the path that I'm on.
Absolutely. And if you're not enjoying yourself, if you're not, like you were saying earlier, music is a very, like, visceral, emotional thing for you, and you're trying to, like, capture that on the recording, because otherwise it just sounds hollow and it doesn't sound real, and it just it misses something. So when you get that moment where you're just able to, like, stand there and soak it in and go, I am where I need to be.
Yeah. And I'm hypersensitive to that emotional stuff too, because it's real. I don't even necessarily want to say it's fashionable. I just think it's kind of commonplace for this kind of art music where there's a lot of notey stuff going on. You hear the expression soulless shredding. And, like, I don't like the idea of being associated with shred guitar at all. And it's not that I don't like shredders or shred guitar players, and it's arguable that I do shred in some way, whatever that means. I don't know. That's not something that I set out to do necessarily. But I do know that idea that just being associated with this kind of music gives you a bit of a mythology of you're a soulless, purely in it for yourself, just playing a bunch of notes because you can, kind of not interesting. People hesitate to even use the word musician with you, which is probably one of the reasons that I throw myself at the emotional maximumism kind of stuff. It's one, when you're looking for your strengths, I'm not the fastest guitar player in the world. I'm not the best shredder guitar player in the world. I'm not the best two-handed tapping guitar player. I'm not the best at all of that stuff. But I am very emotional. And I have a means to convey my emotional state of being into whatever music I happen to be playing on whatever instrument I happen to be playing it on. And if that's my strength, I'll take it. I don't want to be the greatest guitar player in the world. I don't want to be the fastest guitar player in the world or the best metal guy, the best jazz, or any of that stuff. I want to be the best musician I possibly can be. And being a musician demands me to focus on my humanity. It demands it. It's kind of like the old philosophical thing, like you can put somebody in a room at a young age, never having seen the color red. Never let them see anything red. Never let them see an apple. Never let them see a Corvette. Never let them, any of that stuff. They can never see the color red. But you can give them a book and it can explain all of the math about what it is to see the color red and experience seeing the color red. They can know technically more about it than anybody. But who understands red? Somebody who's been living in that bubble, or somebody who's eaten an apple, or seen a red ball, or seen blood, or because when you think of the connotations of everything that is red, because you don't just see the color red, you associate with it all of your experiences, and if your main experience with red is a nice, delicious apple, then red is a very pleasing thing because it's tasty, it's sweet, it's nourishing, it's good. If your experience with red is blood, that can come with pain and seeing somebody hurt, and it can be traumatic. So you might not want to see the color red. It may be very bad for you. But you have an understanding of the color red that the other guy doesn't have. And I think when you study music, strictly for the sake of, I want to understand, polyrhythmic concepts and all of the modes and scales and arpeggios and all these sweeping techniques and technical everything. And you might play something that is like music, but you have yet to play musically. You have to have some life experience to put into your music. And all of the better artists out there have that, where they're not just interested in guitars. They're not just interested in amplifiers. They're not just interested in metal or classical music or whatever, because it's not just a rock guitar thing. I mean, it's everywhere in music. Some people study music for the sake of music, and that's it. They just live in this theoretical world of just, I like music and music is the best, and I don't pay attention to anything else. And they don't have relationships with people. They don't, they don't knit. They don't paint. They don't hike. They don't go to the gym. They don't watch a basketball game. They don't get into the culinary arts. They don't drink wines. They don't know the finer points of whiskey and cigars or anything. There's this whole world of things to experience out there, and they can't talk articulately about any of it because they don't care. They don't care because none of that appeals to their humanity. They are only interested in the technical nature of music, whatever kind of music it is, whether it's guitar music or symphonic or whatever. And I think that's a shame. And if they are inclined to tell me that they write music and they think it's superior, I oftentimes will listen to it, and my opinion will usually be it's soulless music done for the sake of music. It's a very funny thing to think about what is art? What is music? Define it. You can't. You can say things about music, but you can't show me really one thing that says this is music always. About the closest definition I've heard to what music is that all music is organized sound, but not all organized sound is music. I think that's about as true a statement as you can make about music. You can say lots of other things about specific music, mention instruments, but then you're getting into, well, what is an instrument? Everything gets all philosophical and weird from there. I think that's as close as you can get. But I think there are people who organize sound, and it is not necessarily musical, because there is something else intangible that comes along with that musical artistic experience, whether you're performing it or listening to it. That it's hard to define. That is the best articulation for it. All music is organized sound. Not all organized sound is music. And that is about as specific and vague at the same time as I think you can get to it. That's just, you're right next to it, but you're just as far away from it. It's almost like the idea that in quantum mechanics, that you never really touch anything. You never really get anywhere because physically, if say like I've got my hand on my desk and if I start pointing my finger towards this coffee mug, I can go half the distance to the coffee mug. And then I can go half again the distance to the coffee mug. And then half again, and then half again, and half again, and half again, and half again, and half again. Like forever and ever and ever in a quantum world, I am only halfway there. I never actually get there because to get there would be to become the mug. Like my molecules are never going to infuse with the mug. I can get painfully close to it, but really the physicality of the atomic nature of the particles that make up this coffee mug and the atomic nature of the particles that make up my finger repel each other. They will not intersect. And I think that's like defining music. I think it's kind of like a quantum sort of paradox that you can try to explain it, but by trying to explain it, you ruin the nature of the thing. By trying to observe it, you change the nature of the thing. So it's like you can't really see it in its pure state because you're looking at it. You know, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I've read up on a little bit of quantum mechanics, and it gets very tedious and annoying to realize that as soon as you try to test something is when it ceases to be testable. And it becomes something entirely like you were saying. But yeah, you're really right about music as far as some people try and they have all the math written down, but it doesn't equal what it should equal, which is what's inside of them. They aren't really letting it out. They're just punching in numbers. But I think I've had you talking for quite a while now.
Yeah, and, I think I've been talking for a bit.
Which I certainly appreciate. I certainly appreciate you sitting down with me and spending your valuable time speaking about these questions that I had and just some experiences of yours. And at this point, I'd like to take a moment just to point out some of the things that are upcoming for you, let you point out anything that we should keep an eye on. I know that on October 6th, in just about a week, there is the Atlanta Music Scene United Against Cancer concert, which is at 120 Tavern and Music Hall. And you're playing on there as well as bands like Halcyon Way and Throat Punch and Inviolate. But if you want to tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, basically it's, through just the comedy of what is my career, I tend to keep dipping my toes into everything. Like, and here I am in the metal scene I will be the turd in the punch bowl at this gig. Everybody else is metal. And like, I'm going in there with my fusion trio and it's going to be rock. I mean, we're definitely we're going to rock it out, but it's so different from all the other bands there. Like, I wish I had a bunch of stuff written like Animals as Leaders or something, because that would probably go over better with this crowd, but just do what I do and do it really loud. And, that's kind of the one thing is that most people that are into metal are attracted to, guitar playing. So I think that's kind of why they wanted me on this bill. And anytime I have an opportunity to do something that benefits a cancer charity, it's a personal vendetta that I have against cancer. I've lost family members and I've lost friends, and I have friends who are ill now, and I have friends who have family members who are ill now, and it's just you got to do what you can. You pick your fights in this world, and this is one of my fights. So anytime I can donate blood for a cause or play at a benefit that is for leukemia research or cancer research or things like that. So this for me, it's just a good opportunity for me to use my meager skill set for, some good, bring a little notoriety to this particular cancer charity, the Atlanta Cancer Care Foundation, which gets, it basically gets hospice care to people who are living through chemotherapy and dealing with the fight of cancer. So, I mean, it's nice to be able to bring them some attention, as well as raise a little bit of money and awareness, about this stuff. I know we're making strides medically every year, but we have yet to beat cancer. And, let's just keep the fight going and keep it on people's mind. If this is doable, we can get it there. So that's really cool, and really cool to get to do this gig with some of these bands. Like I've known John Bodan from Halcyon Way for a long time. He's been a good friend of mine, and I like his band a lot. And it's cool to get to be on the bill with them. So looking forward to just hanging out with some really cool bands and really good friends that I don't get to see all the time. Because that's the thing, you're in the music scene. All your friends tend to be musicians, so we all tend to be working, and usually at different clubs at different times and different whatever. So it would be nice to have a room full of friends for one day for a change, at the same place where we can catch up and just see each other play and encourage each other, and just do it all for a good cause too. So it's going to be fantastic.
Absolutely. I hope it goes really well. I hope the turnout's really high. Additionally, everyone can go make sure you check out Mike Martin's solo record 2 of 5 and look forward to the one he's writing now. You can go to his website at www.mikemartin.net and find him on Facebook and Twitter. Also, keep an eye on his band, Agent Cooper, www.agentcooper.com, and check out their new EP, From the Ashes, which will be followed up by a record at some point later on. And hopefully they get to tour, and I can tell you guys about that whenever I hear any tour dates, maybe in the U.S. or abroad.
I guess I can leave this out, too. The album is going to be called Far From Sleep, is the title of the album.
Agent Cooper, Far From Sleep. Fantastic. All right, Mike, thanks for chatting with us. Do you have any final things you'd like to say to your fans?
Just thank you guys for checking this out. And I know we had opened this up to see if anybody wanted to submit any questions. I don't know if you stuck them in just the round of questions or not, but I'm always accessible with that stuff too. If you submitted a question or wanted to submit a question, and send it to Barry here at Better Be Sharp and have him harangue me again, and we'll do another round of this. Or you can always get in touch with me through my website too if you want to know more about my producing or my session work, or what guitar stuff I use, strings, picks, any of that stuff. I always answer questions about any of that stuff. So please contact me. I'm very engaged on Twitter and Facebook too. So don't be a stranger. Come make fun of pictures of my cats that I have up and all that stuff.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for listening. And as always, this is Barry from Better Be Sharp. Have a nice day.